Gaslighting is a form of psychological abuse and manipulation that can lead to the victim questioning their judgments and reality. Gaslighting can be a weapon used by many for psychological manipulation, questioning your mental well-being.
To all these conspiracy theorists who are like, oh, people who disagree with me don't exist, they're just grifting to get views, you're kind of crazy. Yeah, people who disagree with you exist. I'm not thinking people who like Shadow of the Erdtree don't exist, because how could somebody disagree with my opinion? Because it's so true. Like, no, I don't think that way. That's such a weird way to think. It's just a YouTube video, man. I don't know why you're so insane about this.
Playing the victim.
Toxicity in the Fromsoft community. So I said it's the worst community. Why do I think that? With the Fromsoft community, I'll make a video that's negative, and then some of these videos that are almost 3 years old now are still getting daily angry comments about why I'm stupid and wrong and all of that stuff. The only way to make the comments stop so that I could reclaim my YouTube studio would be to deactivate all comments on Fromsoft videos to divorce myself from the community. I probably won't do that, but the fact that I feel pressured to is something that would only happen in the Fromsoft community. I will say that my bigger issue with some of the comments that I showed in my video is not the toxicity, it was just the fact that they weren't very smart.
Rewriting your memory.
Some people misunderstood my last video because I said some FromSoft fans argued like they were in a cult. So commenters created a straw man saying that I said everyone who disagrees with me is in a cult. I never said that. That would be outrageous. Feel free to disagree. I'm not a Disney villain or a politician. Skipping boss mechanics doesn't make me enjoy them, and I am tired of this brain-dead FromSoft cult-like response to avoid all criticism, and to act like their game has no flaws because you can skip some parts of it if you don't like it. Part of the reason I find it so annoying to argue with FromSoft fans is because they always start every conversation from the perspective that every complaint is your fault in some way, get good, Miyazaki games are inherently perfect. It's so brain-dead, like they aren't individuals who think for themselves, but cult members preaching their creed.
I'm the only one you can trust.
Gred says that I complain about strawman arguments while having strawman arguments of my own, and then he proceeds to strawman literally every argument of mine in this section that he brings up. He did not interpret a single one correctly. I'll show you a little bit of the footage from my live reacting to his video here, but I'm not exactly sure what happened here or why he finds me so difficult to understand. But then again, he's approaching my videos from the perspective that I literally don't have authentic feelings and I'm just lying to him, so maybe it's hard for him to listen to what I'm saying.
Minimizing your feelings are issues.
Some people might say, but you plagiarized Joe, so shouldn't you go to jail? And it's like, I don't think Joe will sue me over a one-sentence intentional reference to his video in a video with his name in the title. It didn't do much damage, but did calling me a manipulative gaslighter sycophant who can't admit fault to 300,000 people cause damage to me?
Redirecting blame onto you.
Let me say that I don't think "in defense of" needs to mean that I am wholly in love with what I am defending. All it means is that I'm presenting some sort of defense that is more positive than what I and many others have put out previously, which is exactly what that video is. I think a lot of people who watch my videos don't really listen to me when I speak. They see a flashy thumbnail, watch 5 minutes, dislike, and leave.
I want to talk about this. Not because I am interested in responding to Feeble, I genuinely think I've been a bit harsh on him before, but because I truly think this is a landmark moment in the community. I haven't seen a situation this spicy since the Revan 619 bow glitch debacle, but I promise this isn't going to be a drama video. This is me adding my voice to the discussion of the current culture of critique videos on YouTube, because after a decade of stewing on these feelings, I think this topic is finally being widely discussed amongst the community. More importantly perhaps, I think this video will be a helpful guide on how to not handle criticism as a YouTuber, as well as how to spot if your favorite YouTuber is being toxic to you as the audience. We'll start by giving some ways that a creator can gaslight their audience. But before that, let's just start at the beginning. Some of you may know that Gred Glintstone made a video titled The Lost Art of Video Game Critique, where he discusses a problem of YouTubers ripping each other off and propagating a style of toxic critique. Moreover, that this style of critique is ultimately harmful to the art and the audience, and it's a video that I quite enjoyed and found a sense of catharsis. Not because he was mean to people I've responded to, but because he touched on things that have deeply troubled me about the discourse surrounding Fromsoft games for many, many years now. Feeble King plays a part in this video, and for those unaware, Feeble is a successful new video game critique YouTuber who seems to have built the majority of his content and audience on From Software games. On Christmas Day, he responded to Gred in a 40-minute video, and then within a day, released a second video threatening legal action, presumably in an attempt to intimidate Gred into taking down his video.
Honestly, I think Gred's video is so bad and illegal that if he had any integrity at all, he'd take it down for the massive amount of misinformation and what might be a defamatory statement inside of it. Of course, this probably won't happen because the guy wants his 5 minutes of fame in the YouTube algorithm.
This is the first time I have seen anything like this in the community. But to his credit, Feeble King thought better and took that second video down within the hour. I feel this is historical in this small community that we have etched out on the internet, and I want to remember it by giving you my thoughts on it, as it was initially the reason that I wanted to talk about this situation. However, while I think this is just some silly thing, I am sure that there will be some hard feelings, so I just want to right off the bat apologize to Feeble, as this is the 4th video that I will be making at this point about him, and I want to say sorry, because I truly do not wish to pick on you when I don't do this to anyone else. I am possibly the last person Feeble will want to hear this from, so I am going to try to avoid sounding smug or making unnecessary dunks on him. Now again, take this with a grain of salt, as Feeble has quickly swept this video under the rug. However, my justification for showing you this is based on 3 things. The fact that Feeble has also threatened legal action in a few comments before editing those as well, the fact that this deleted or possibly just unlisted video is still available on his Patreon for profit, and that Feeble has mentioned in several comments that the reason he took down the video was to avoid getting himself in legal trouble, and not that he actually disagreed with what he presented. Even despite that, I still feel kinda weird addressing a video that was unpublished by its creator, so I thought I would try and make it productive. It's not really fair to address the deleted video without addressing the main video that's still up, so we're going to start by doing just that. The problem with both videos, however, in my opinion, is that they are not very good. Gred's main points were that the people who do this style of ripped-off, destructive criticism for the sake of showmanship and the roast comedy of their videos a la Joseph Anderson are toxic and struggle to handle criticism despite being so harsh themselves. I feel that Feeble's response videos did a much better job at proving Gred right than any of his Shadow of the Erdtree videos. Many points of discussion about Gred's videos are mired in a blatant misunderstanding of the arguments and criticisms being presented, and whether that was done intentionally or not, I want to help Feeble and the people that have seen his video to understand where Gred is coming from. As bad as this video may sound at times, I think that it is actually Feeble who can be his own worst enemy, because he made a community post saying he would respond to Gred's video soon, and all the comments were begging him not to respond, but he went ahead and did it anyways, and ended up with a half-scripted video making a big deal about it, when one of the main points of the video was that Feeble, and Anderson for that matter, are unable to handle criticism. I think if Feeble had realized this, he would not have responded considering the bad optics. At the very least, he would have been a lot more careful about it. So, I want to help him realize what Gred meant about his criticisms, because as Anderson says, good criticism is a gift to creators. And we will start with the main video that is still up. Now, this video is 45 minutes long, and I am not going to respond to everything. Instead, let's take a look at a few select sections of that video, because it is my opinion that unfortunately, most of what Feeble argues in this video is more bad faith and glaring strawman arguments. This is only a sample size, however, so if you don't believe me, please feel free to watch his video yourself and form your own opinion. Feeble is quite upset at Gred right now, claiming that he has been clip farming Feeble to deliberately take him out of context. I don't want to do that, so I will be showing extended clips, so apologies for that. Let's start with the accusation of sycophantic behavior, because Feeble starts his video with this and mentions it again in his unpublished video, so it may be one of the things that really bugs him the most.
Let's talk about when he called me a sycophant, which means someone who praises powerful or rich people in a way that is not sincere, usually in order to get some advantage from them.
The only reason that I can think that he included Joseph Anderson at all, instead of separating these videos, is that he wants Anderson to see how mean people are being to him, and goes right back to talking about the mean comments. It is blatantly sycophantic.
So basically, Gred doesn't understand why I included Joseph Anderson in my video, so he constructs a fantasy where the reason why is because I'm trying to gain something from him. He doesn't go into details about what that thing is. Like, I don't know Joseph Anderson, I've never talked to the guy, he's never given me anything, but also the reason why I did it is because I thought he had some inconsistencies with his views on trial and error when he was comparing the base game bosses to the DLC bosses. I wanted to examine that. That is the reason why I included him, and the reason why I glazed him for 2 minutes isn't because I'm doing blind sycophantic behavior to gain favor with a YouTuber. It's just because I like the guy. I've been watching him for a while. This is my YouTube channel. I talk about things I like on it. I talk about things I dislike on it. And so because I was bringing up Joseph Anderson, I wanted to give my authentic opinion on his channel before I analyzed him. That's all. The only thing that Gred alludes to be what I am gaining is the sympathy of another creator because I'm complaining about the mean comments, when in reality, I couldn't care less if he saw that part of the video.
His argument is that Gred can't prove why he was being sycophantic, as in, show me what tangible advantage I gained from trying to appeal to a bigger creator. He says Gred doesn't know why Feeble would want to talk about Joseph Anderson's video. Joseph Anderson, of course, being Feeble's main inspiration for his YouTube channel, as well as a long-winded critic who has been commenting on Fromsoft games for a decade. That is not why Gred was confused. He knows that Feeble allegedly wants to use Joe's video as talking points for a discussion. He just doesn't believe that to be his true motivation. Gred was not confused as to why Feeble would talk about Joseph Anderson. He was confused as to why he only did that for a minuscule portion of his video. A video that is partially titled Response to Joseph Anderson's Critique. The context Feeble cuts around in this clip is that Gred was talking about the fact that Feeble only spends maybe 10 minutes of his 1-hour video talking about Anderson's video, and spends the other 50 minutes complaining about the mean comments and people disagreeing with him in his last video. Gred states that he can only guess that Feeble titled his video what he did to try and neg Joseph Anderson and get his attention. The problem for Gred was not that Feeble wanted to talk about Joseph Anderson's video. It was that Anderson's video was not the actual focus or point of Feeble's video. It was a tiny section, and Feeble neglects to address this criticism. Gred even says that he simply should have separated his response to Joe into its own video. Combining these two ideas is one of the reasons that gives credence to an ulterior motivation. Gred tries to point out that there is a distinct lack of discussion or point of comparison to Joe's opinions anywhere in the video, and what is there is cursory and shallow, which is bizarre given their contrasting opinions on Shadow of the Erdtree. Even in that brief section, Feeble spends most of it addressing Anderson's opinions of the base game, not Shadow of the Erdtree.
In this 1-hour video, which was intended to be a response to Joseph Anderson's critique, Feeble spends 12 minutes talking about Joseph Anderson. 2 of those minutes are, in his own words, glazing him. He spends the other 50 minutes complaining about the mean comments that he got in his last video. The only reason that I can think that he included Joseph Anderson at all, instead of separating these videos, is that he wants Anderson to see how mean people are being to him. He's telling on his audience, he's saying, see, they're being mean to me too. He doesn't respond to Joseph's thoughts about the DLC itself at all, which is so bizarre because Joe loved it and Feeble hated it. I think. He doesn't defend his opinions of why the DLC is bad. He seems embarrassed by that. Instead, he argues against one safe minor point that Joseph makes in order to praise the base game. Then he makes a Witcher 3 joke and goes right back to talking about the mean comments. It is blatantly sycophantic. This isn't a response to his critique at all. Feeble King cannot handle criticism. Joseph Anderson cannot handle criticism, but they are 2 of the harshest critics on YouTube.
This is all, of course, in the larger context that Feeble is constantly bringing up Joe and says that he is the main inspiration for his YouTube channel and style of videos. Optically, it kind of feels like Feeble was a bit embarrassed by all the backlash he got from his original Shadow of the Erdtree video, with the final straw being that his favorite creator disagreed with him as well. Feeble may have seen Joseph Anderson making a follow-up video complaining about his comments, thought that was a dandy idea, then actually wanted to make a video doing damage control and mostly complain about his comments. All of this is why Gred calls this behavior sycophantic. He is suggesting that complaining about his audience to get Joe to notice him is the ulterior motive. Garnering sympathy from a larger audience that is already accustomed to your video format could be quite lucrative after all, and an easy way to grow your audience. We can speculate all day as to a motivation for Feeble's behavior, but either way, the point is that Feeble says he is man enough to be able to agree to disagree with Anderson, but then he spends the rest of the video chewing out his audience for disagreeing with him. Besides, calling someone a sycophant is not something that has to be proven, like when Feeble calls Gred stupid or insane. He doesn't need to provide an IQ test or psychological evaluation of Gred as evidence. It's a subjective opinion about somebody. Feeble insists that there has been no advantage gained, but this is debatable as the video may have gotten more views otherwise by having Joseph Anderson in the title, and he has gained subscribers since then. I myself have experienced this very thing. Even if he pinky promises that he was not simply making an appeal, from Gred's perspective, Feeble's choices for his script and title, along with his history of praising and defending Joseph Anderson, referencing Anderson in videos completely unrelated to him, ripping off his style, mentioning in several videos the possibility of Joe watching Feeble's videos and wondering if he is directly informed by and responding to Feeble's opinions, the fact that this isn't even his first response to a Joseph Anderson video, Feeble being so negative in his Fromsoft videos towards his audience and the art, while having this one soft spot for Joe despite saying, "I'm about to be a little negative," and claiming that Joseph Anderson is his main inspiration for his entire YouTube channel, combined with the observation that it doesn't make sense to make this video about Joseph Anderson when the actual focus of the video is just Feeble responding to his critics, it just sort of seems sycophantic, in his subjective opinion. We're not even at the part where Feeble defends Anderson and suggests a joint lawsuit, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's take a look at the next example.
Gred uses clips from my original Elden Ring critique of me saying it's one of my favorite games and contrasts it with my DLC critique where I say I don't like it to prove that I am inconsistent when they are different products. I clearly explained this in my last video.
Elden Ring has truly given me the best of times. I said repeatedly to my friends that this is my personal favorite game of all time.
Feeble said this is his favorite game.
But Feeble Grifter, I hear you say. Why did you go from liking Elden Ring to disliking it? Is it not to clout chase for views? Well, base game Elden Ring is not the same content pack as Shadow of the Erdtree. They're like two separate games stuck together. Some of the strengths and weaknesses are the same, and some of them are not. I still consider base game Elden Ring to be a masterpiece. This is partially because levels mattered, so every path had good rewards for my build, but it's more than that. I like the base game, I don't like the DLC. Shouldn't be too confusing. I don't know why he's like, oh, but does he like Elden Ring or not? It's not one package, there's two packages here, okay? Separated by 2.5 years of time.
Feeble claims that Gred doesn't understand how Feeble can have a different opinion on the base game of Elden Ring and the DLC. The problem is that Feeble is misrepresenting Gred's argument again. Gred was not saying that Feeble is inconsistent for liking the base game but not the DLC. Gred is saying that Feeble is bad at conveying how he actually feels about the games he is talking about. The first example is Feeble shitting on the DLC, and then in the next video saying, "When I said this is the worst DLC, it doesn't mean I thought it was terrible." Again, shifting blame to his audience for misinterpreting him and gaslighting them, which is the greater point being made here. The fact that Feeble critiques in a way which causes his end product to be indiscernible and then getting mad at his critics when they point this out, or his audience when they simply correctly interpret his opinion based on what he has provided them.
Feeble, in his original review, titled Fromsoft's Worst DLC, where he calls the designers absurdly lazy, where he sarcastically says that he would only recommend it to people on a dare, where he says that he wishes it didn't exist, Feeble says this in his follow-up.
And to clear up another thing, worst DLC yet does not mean terrible.
Classic gaslighting. If you were teaching a class on gaslighting, you'd do very well to use this as an example. He is absolutely distorting the reality of the situation to save face. There is absolutely no other takeaway from the information that he provided that gives room for any other interpretation than that he thinks the DLC is terrible. At what point does it stop being the audience's mistake for interpreting him incorrectly and start being his fault for failing to articulate his experience, for failing to critique?
Gred is imploring Feeble to explain what he thinks the DLC is if it's not terrible, because the only information that we have to go off in that video points to Feeble thinking that it is terrible. If Feeble does not think it is terrible, then it is Gred's opinion, and mine for that matter, that Feeble has not sufficiently explained why he thought it was any less than terrible. The contradiction is not between his opinion of the base game and the DLC, it's between Feeble's critique and his actual opinion. The second example is where he talks about base game Elden Ring. He tells his friends that Elden Ring is one of his favorite games of all time, but also says, just because I am defending it doesn't need to mean that I am wholly in love with it. Again, giving us this weird wishy-washy opinion. Does he like it or does he not? Of course, you don't need to love something 100%, but the problem for the audience is that it is confusing to use the same style of constantly dunking on both games that you hate and games you consider to be some of your favorites of all time. This application of the format is what makes it hard for the audience to discern when a critic likes a game, hates it, or just thinks it was mid. All we want to do as viewers, at a critique's most basic toddler level, is to understand the critic's real opinion of the game, and we want Feeble to help us. Now, although this is a straw man, I want to do a quick 180 and be fair to Feeble. I think that this second example is a bit of a weaker one, and an example of Gred belaboring the point. I think that Feeble does do a better job in his base game Elden Ring videos supporting his reasons for why he does like certain aspects of the game, and often talks at length about the positives. That's my assessment at least, but it's despite the main focus of those videos being about the negatives or drawbacks, and the thumbnails and titles looking like pure rage bait, and Feeble himself saying those videos were mostly negative. In any case, Gred uses Feeble as the prime example of what he considers many other YouTubers to be engaging in, which is ripping off Joseph Anderson's destructive criticism style, which he in turn ripped off from a single Matthew Matosis video. And while I think it's a reasonable thing to say about Feeble's Shadow of the Erdtree videos and how he handled the backlash there, I think it is too hasty to judge every single one of Feeble's videos in this light. That clip of Feeble that Gred showed, where Feeble says that Elden Ring is his favorite game of all time, is from the intro of his second video, His Heart is the New Normal video. This is my favorite Feeble King video. I completely disagree with Feeble's then opinion of Elden Ring's difficulty, and I think he spreads a great deal of misinformation about the boss design, but he also explains why this doesn't completely ruin the game for him. He does a much better job explaining his personal experience of the game here than in any other video I have seen of his. It is genuinely exciting hearing him express the emotions he felt at different parts of the game. He has a passionate energy and his humor lands better. Even when he was ridiculing the bosses for being bullshit, I still found it funny because the tone of the video allowed me to understand it as relatable gamer rage, even when I thought he didn't understand the bosses at all. I think he still fails at towing that line between saying the bosses are total bullshit and saying this boss is too hard for me to learn. But even if it's not some god-tier, expertly crafted analytical critique, it's still nice to hear people discuss these games, share the experiences they personally had, and be able to understand how it made them feel. This is much more enjoyable content to me than the type of content that Joseph Anderson does. My content preferences aside, Gred is discussing Feeble's Shadow of the Erdtree videos in particular, and while I think I can understand how Feeble would be upset over this when he has made years-old videos where he did talk a bit more about the redeeming qualities of Elden Ring, I don't think it's reasonable to expect everyone to be familiar with your entire body of work. This is YouTube after all. Most people are likely clicking because they are interested in the game, rather than the personality. Now, like I said, I think this second example is a weaker one, but to bring it all back, Gred in this clip is not comparing his opinion of the base game to his opinions of the DLC. Gred is showing multiple examples of Feeble being a poor critic, that makes interpreting his work and understanding his true feelings painfully obtuse. But Feeble argues against something else entirely.
Because if you make a review of a game that is over half an hour long, and then another video, which is a response video that is over an hour long, and I still have no idea how you feel about a game, you have absolutely failed as a critic. If you don't think it's terrible, what is it? Is it good? Is it average? You haven't told me how you actually feel about it. I can't relate my experience to yours because I don't know what your experience is. All I know is the things that you don't like about it, and that's everything. Why don't you think this game is terrible? Why do you make that statement and refuse to elaborate on it? I'm going insane. He also says this about his defensive Elden Ring boss design video, that just because he is defending base game Elden Ring doesn't mean that I am wholly in love with what I am defending.
Elden Ring has truly given me the best of times. I said repeatedly to my friends that this is my personal favorite game of all time.
Feeble said this is his favorite game. Does he not like video games? I legitimately can't tell anymore. My God, not everything is about reward. Sometimes it's about the art. Feeble doesn't mention any of this.
The only intrinsic reward that was consistently good was the environmental art. Every time I discovered a new region of the map, I would be blown away by its immense beauty. The color theory and the lighting is some of the best I've ever seen in video games, almost like a Bob Ross painting come to life. Of course, when actually exploring most of it, all you find are reskinned enemies, NPC bosses, and empty space, but at least it looks really good.
All I know is the things that you don't like about it, and that's everything.
The color theory and the lighting is some of the best I've ever seen in video games.
Feeble says that Gred deliberately lies and claims that Feeble never talked about the art of the DLC by showing this clip. This is again a clip taken out of context. The context being that Gred was specifically talking about the art of the Saint Trina sequence. Gred was not saying that Feeble never discusses the art of the DLC at all, which in my opinion is basically true, but more on that in a bit. He was just saying that Feeble refuses to discuss the art of Saint Trina in favor of doing a bit.
The example he gives for this incredibly toxic community is for someone insulting him for saying the reward for defeating the putrescent knight is a cookbook.
Never have I been insulted by someone who disagrees with me for leaving out information that supports my case.
This is the insult he's complaining about. That's not an insult. That's a subjective opinion. It's not abusive. It's not toxic. He's just calling Feeble out for a bad take, which is justified because it is a bad take. It doesn't matter how much Feeble values the Centrina questline or the rewards they give. It is an objectively incorrect statement to say that the cookbook is the reward. There is no implication of subjectivity there. It doesn't matter if he didn't think they were good rewards. They were still rewards. He didn't think the cookbook was a good reward either. He said cookbook instead of the other things because it was funnier for the video. He was doing a bit which is intentionally misleading. What a greedy grifter goblin. And while we're on this, for a guy that loves analyzing his favorite art, FromSoft games included, how are you not talking about Centrina? Let's pause for a second and actually critique the game. Look at this. This might be my favorite character design in FromSoft history, and this OST, my God, not everything is about reward. Sometimes it's about the art. Feeble doesn't mention any of this. It's always about what he can get out of it. If it doesn't make him stronger, then it doesn't care. How boring. What a shallow interpretation of this whole sequence.
Specifically, Saint Trina. You know, this unique and important NPC that's mystery and imagery is built up all throughout the base game of Elden Ring. An NPC that captured the imaginations of lore nerds and was heavily speculated and discussed amongst the community for years, and then actually made an appearance in the DLC. It's like if Lady Tomoe appeared in a Sekiro DLC, but with way more build-up. All the lore descriptions, the sleep status effect, weapons, consumables, crafting items in the form of lilies in the environment, the butterflies that clued us into Saint Trina being linked to Mikola years before the DLC. It's a staggering amount of story material to discuss and is what intrigued so many people about this character. Despite all this juicy information, there was still so much that was shrouded in mystery. If ever there was hype for an NPC in a Souls game, it would be this NPC, and maybe Sigurd or Patches. But even if you think Saint Trina was very bad, it seems like an interesting discussion to talk about the letdown of her final reveal, especially considering the reason that Feeble states for his exaggerated negativity in his videos as coming from the disappointment that he felt in a game that he was hoping he would love. I will also remind my audience that Feeble cares more about the lore in these games than Joseph Anderson or me for that matter. In his In Defense of Elden Ring video, he says he cares about the lore and it impacts his enjoyment of Fromsoft games.
This is made even worse, since unlike Joe, I actually do care a good amount about the story of most Fromsoft games, and Elden Beast is so bad that he actually ruined the plot for me. I'm not joking.
Bringing it back to his Shadow of the Erdtree video, Feeble says that you only get a cookbook for beating Putrescent Knight, which leaves out the remembrance weapons and spells, the boss runes for leveling, the grove of St. Trina lilies to craft OP consumables, St. Trina's story, design, and character, Thialie's questline and how this influences the Leda fight and story, the armor you get from Thialie and his weapons like the needle for sleep builds and the poison perfume, the talisman you get, and possibly some others I'm missing. Of course, Feeble hand-waves this because he was only talking about what he calls extrinsic rewards, and he mentions elsewhere in his video how he thinks each and every one of these general types of rewards is worthless in his mind. However, this still doesn't include Feeble's thoughts on the quests, characters, area, music, or story. Not to mention that just stating all you get is a cookbook can lead some viewers to believe that Feeble had completely missed the questline or NPC, something that has happened to game reviewers in the past. Regardless, the point of this in Gred's video was to show how Feeble can be intentionally misleading in his critique of the work for the sake of roast comedy, and why this is what makes this style of video rotten to its core and detrimental to the art and the critique of it. It serves the dual purpose of being an example of Anderson and Feeble clinging to their subjectivity as implied shield, even when they are making objectively false statements, and it also shows Feeble backpedaling and gaslighting his audience when they point this out to him. It doesn't matter that Feeble thought the plethora of rewards you get and the art were boring. He can just say that instead of saying,
Another time I was taken aback by the game's laziness was when I completed the Stone Coffin Fissure Legacy dungeon and beat Putrescent Knight, only to be rewarded with a cookbook. They couldn't even have the decency to reward me with a single Shadow Tree fragment.
And then not mentioning anything else. His audience will naturally wonder what he thought about all that other stuff specifically, and it is a fair thing to criticize about Feeble's critique. As Gred points out, why does Feeble say all you get is a cookbook instead of all you get is a boring-ass monologue, or a boring-ass questline, or a boring-ass weapon and spells? He says cookbook because it's a funny Reddit meme, because he does it for the bit. He does it again when talking about the Abyssal Woods, and only says cookbook without mentioning the Shadow Tree blessings that he covets, or the NPC encounter, the new weapons like the Mad Hand and Frenzy perfume, and likely some other rewards I'm forgetting again. And that's not to mention the lore implications and story of the Hornsent Inquisition and the haunting imagery they convey that with, or discussing much about the unique stealth section even if you thought it was bad. He may be specifically talking about the lack of caves, but again, he only mentions that all you get is cookbooks for the sake of the bit. Getting back to the St. Trina example, I am sure that this was as bizarre to Gred as it was to me. A guy who claims that he loves analyzing his favorite art, and who titles his video a critique of Shadow of the Erdtree, is given this much meat to bite into, and instead of taking this opportunity to actually talk about the art, good or bad, he is instead wholly focused on what combat rewards you get because he just likes feeling strong and getting Shadow Tree fragments. Gred also mentions that he believes that this focus on the roast comedy is cynically designed for views, and it comes at the expense of the art and the discussion of it. Feeble seems very proud of the fact that he doesn't want to waste his audience's time talking about the boring-ass art. This is also more to Gred's point, where he defines the purpose of critique by its definition, that critique is to help the audience understand art, and how it seems to clash with what Feeble and Joseph do in their critiques, which is more akin to amateur game development. It is wholly focused on the negative and only concerned with changing the game in their vision to be made better, no matter how good or bad it already is. The funny thing about the clip that Feeble shows is that in it, he shows the entirety of his discussion about the DLC's environmental art, character designs, music, atmosphere, and ambience in his entire 40-minute video. There are maybe a couple other offhand remarks where he discusses any characters or the stories told, and he also spends a good deal shitting on the pretty landscapes as being a lame substitute for actual exploration rewards.
Also, he says, like, oh, he doesn't mention any positives, when I do mention some positives, like the visuals, and I also say at the end of the video that it isn't just the honeymoon phase, and people with preferences that are not mine will like the game and think it's genuinely good, and I did say that, but he doesn't mention those parts of the critique. I've been pretty negative throughout this video, so let me state that there are definitely some groups of people who will enjoy this game, and that the hype isn't just because of the honeymoon phase. People who are satisfied with pretty visuals as the main reward for exploration, people who like beating bosses with overpowered builds, and people who like to perfect boss mechanics through many hours of trial and error will all enjoy Elden Ring DLC. And fair enough, the negative is a lot more than the positive, because there's a lot more for me to talk about in the negative when the positive is mostly just another pretty flower field.
He uses Shaman Village as his example of an area with no substance other than just being pretty. Then he finishes his video by saying that certain people might like Shadow of the Erdtree if they like pretty visuals as the main reward for exploration. And it kind of feels like he's downplaying the emotional impact that those visuals and story moments can have on people in light of his previous comments. This is a little in the weeds, but suffice to say that Gred was only referring to the St. Trina sequence, and Feeble seemingly has clip farmed him to misrepresent him and to cast doubt over his competence. Or maybe he just misunderstood him.
I pointed out in my critique that the reward for beating Putrescence Knight is a cookbook. Many people called me intentionally misleading for making this statement, since the real reward is St. Trina's quest line. I left this out of my critique because I didn't want to waste time talking about a side quest that I found boring. To all the people who remain unconvinced and think I left out St. Trina to pull one over on the audience, let me ask you what's more likely. Could I be a shifty politician who makes things up for views in the shadows? Or perhaps the quest was underwhelming and didn't lead to a good extrinsic reward, and I didn't want to slow down the video explaining a whole ass side quest chain. Maybe I thought that anyone who completed the quest already knew that the extrinsic reward was useless for most builds, which relates to my biggest issue with the DLC, the terrible rewards, and because of that I didn't feel the need to break down every little piece of evidence that supports my case. Let me ask you another question. Why would I intentionally withhold information that supports my main argument of bad extrinsic rewards? Maybe I'm trying to keep up the pacing of the video and I don't want to talk about things I find boring. Or, what if I'm an evil grifter sent from outer space to convince the people of Earth that Fromsoft fell off? That federal hearing about the aliens? That was about me. I'll try to do better in the future to predict what unmentioned details will cause Fromsoft fans to be angry in the comments, but I have to say that this isn't a problem with any other community on the internet. Never have I been insulted by someone who disagrees with me for leaving out information that supports my case.
I am an alien grifter from outer space. That trial about the aliens, that was about me. Gred. That's an obvious strawman argument. This is the last example we'll talk about as to why I think Feeble's first response is not worth more of our time. Feeble, despite decrying that he is constantly being strawmanned by people that disagree with his opinions, seems to not understand what a strawman argument is. You might already have thought that from previous examples, but I digress. Feeble attempts to mock Gred for not understanding that Feeble was making a joke, and suggests that Gred can't tell that Feeble was being hyperbolic when he said that he is a grifter alien from outer space.
Bro, I don't even have to say much about this one. How can you put this in your video and then accuse your audience of strawman arguments in the same breath?
Oh my god, a joke is an obvious strawman argument. You lost me, man. You lost me.
Of course, just because you are trying to make a joke about something does not mean that you are not trying to deflect valid criticism. It isn't mutually exclusive. The argument being made against Feeble in the comment he is responding to is that he is playing up the negativity for views. Feeble does say, after all, that he makes choices for the sake of the drama of his videos. This comment is in regard to the earlier St. Trina cookbook bit, but the greater implication of this is that Feeble is ripping off Joseph's style of video because he sees it as a successful venture and is actually uninterested in providing good faith critique of art despite presenting it as such. Instead, here, Feeble says that he isn't rage baiting for views, nor is he a bad critic for completely neglecting the discussion of St. Trina so his audience has no way of knowing what he thought about it or even knew it existed. He's just trying to keep the pace of the video interesting, and it's his audience's fault for not realizing that. My audience should have known I thought it was boring and worthless when I didn't talk about it, because it's not like I'm some alien life form sent from outer space to grift you. He is posturing the original argument that he is being misleading for the sake of rage bait and roast comedy, and that neglecting the discussion of the art makes him a bad critic as ridiculous, and his excuse of doing it for the video's pacing as the sane, rational motivation. This is still a form of strawman. Feeble is making an exaggerated joke in order to distort the original argument as part of his continued dismissal of criticism and his refusal to accept that he was wrong.
It's Feeble that is being toxic here by deflecting that argument and blaming the commenter, and it's Feeble that is using a strawman argument. When Feeble brings up the accusation that he plays up his negativity for views, that he's rage baiting, he says this.
Maybe I'm trying to keep up the pacing of the video and I don't want to talk about things I find boring. Or, what if I'm an evil grifter sent from outer space to convince the people of Earth that Fromsoft fell off?
I mean, bro, I don't even have to say much about this one. How can you put this in your video and then accuse your audience of strawman arguments in the same breath? This lack of self-awareness is genuinely shocking.
This was Gred's point, that Feeble is being toxic by constantly deflecting criticisms of his review onto his audience. We'll have more on this in the Death Knight example later on, but also, Gred obviously understands humor, and more importantly, that humor can still be a form of strawman. We would know this if we watched the first 6 minutes of his video.
Joseph Anderson said in his new video that he has no intention of having opinions used as objective truth that spreads to the masses. He makes a big thing of it in his intro, where he makes a strawman argument that people think he's Satan for trying to sow his objective opinion. Obviously, I know it's a joke, but he's put that there for a reason. It doesn't matter what his intention is. It doesn't matter if he has no intention of presenting his information as facts. People will adopt his opinion as their own. He will change the perception of how some people think. Intention is irrelevant. A strawman argument is when someone uses a distorted, weaker argument that is easier to refute than the one that is actually being presented. Kind of like Joseph Anderson at the top of his video sarcastically implying that people think he's Satan for telling them how to think, even though he does that all the time because he believes that he can make arguments about art that are irrefutable. He thinks he can prove his opinions. Joseph Anderson is the king of strawman arguments.
It may surprise some of you to know that the opening of this video is not a joke to some people. People think that way about me and anyone else that criticizes Daddy Fromsoft because that's how extreme the discourse has gotten around these games. Some people really do think I want to have my perspective ingrained on the masses and infects all conversations as an objective take, even though I've never done that and have gone out of my way so many times to explicitly state otherwise.
When it comes to reviews, objectivity is vital, and it's the job of the reviewer to do their best to separate their own bias in order to give the game a fair evaluation. This is, of course, impossible to do completely. You can't switch off personal taste or preferences, but it's still important for them to be acknowledged. However, games are made of so many different parts that objectively measuring at least some of them is usually possible. The list shown right now has some of the usual suspects that can be appraised quite easily. Does a game look good? Whether we're talking about graphics or aesthetic, it's often easy to view a game and see how much of its visuals are impressive. For Darkest Dungeon, some of these are quite easy to judge. The game's graphic novel style is fantastic.
And I could very well be wrong about where I want a game to go, and most people would prefer otherwise. But these toxic assholes that have latched onto this series, probably because it's the first time in their life that something held them accountable, so now they view a game dev as a surrogate parent, need to stop being a dominant voice in all of these conversations.
Joseph goes on a tirade against the toxic positivity of fans that wave away problems by saying skill issue and get good, but the issues that he talks about here have absolutely nothing to do with skill.
Feels to me that their player base at large is finally starting to get tired of the same problems being in the games that have been there from the start. And I'm not talking about much more subjective things like boss design here when it comes to these problems. I'm talking about unfinished sections, why are gank fights, online guides being a requirement for basic boring quest content, and the beginning of memes ridiculing how they keep reusing the same themes and imagery. Miyazaki, forgive me, not to mention even the lore people seem to be disappointed in the DLC's ending because there was nothing there, and they're usually the champions of seeing so much when there's nothing.
If you are not convinced at this point, like I, that the rest of the video is full of bad faith arguments, such as hand-waving away criticisms of his opinions simply because they weren't his main argument, or claiming that his misquotes were actually simplified quotes, which isn't a real thing, in order to save the pacing of the video by a couple words, or nitpicking Gred in Elden Ring while bemoaning Gred in commenters nitpicking his own opinions, then I would encourage you to go check it out and let me know your thoughts on it in the comments, because at this point, I am content with moving on. Feeble spends so much time berating people for discussing aspects of his critique that weren't just his two intended main points of bad exploration rewards and too much trial and error. But what Feeble doesn't understand is that this style of critique that he emulates is so shallow that the only way one can respond to it is with simple statements such as, "I liked the rewards because I use them and I think they're fun," and "I think the amount of trial and error was good." This style of critique does not stimulate any deeper discussion or understanding of the art, because it is just a gamer comparing a work of art to their imagination and saying this good and this bad. These 2+ hour quote-unquote critiques that use the word masterpiece more than any diehard fan are nothing more than long-winded buy or pass product reviews. For that matter, I would also strongly encourage you to watch Gred's video, The Lost Art of Video Game Critique, as I think it still speaks for itself in light of this response video. All I've done here is basically mansplain that video, which, truth be told, I really didn't have to given how clear and easy to understand Gred made it, in my opinion anyways. If you need any last convincing before we move on, then I would encourage you to watch Feeble's video section titled Plagiarism, where he proves Gred's point of toxic individuals struggle to admit when they are wrong yet again by spending this entire section hand-wringing about how exaggerated of a problem referencing without a citation is, that if it is plagiarism, that it wasn't his intent, that if it was his intent, then it would be dumb to mention the guy he is plagiarizing, and how other people do it worse than he did, instead of accepting responsibility for not providing an easy citation. As Gred says, intent is irrelevant.
In one part of my video, I explain my views on subjectivity and how I don't think I should have to say in my opinion when I'm making a video, and then I make a reference to Joseph Anderson's subjectivity is implied video. I think people forget this when I speed up the pacing and drama of my video by not saying in my opinion every 2 sentences, but in my opinion, subjectivity is implied. I put Joseph Anderson in the title and then said that in that section so that Joseph Anderson fans who understood the reference would get where I'm coming from, and if I was intentionally trying to plagiarize Joe's video, it would be a bad idea to put him in the title and all over the video. I still think the plagiarism accusation's a little bit much, because when I put Joseph Anderson in the title and then make a reference to a Joseph Anderson video in the video, I'm obviously not trying to hide my influence. I'm saying that so Joseph Anderson fans know what I'm talking about. I wanted them to know the reference, but I guess I can also see how people who aren't Joseph Anderson fans, who wouldn't get the reference, maybe would want to be clued in with a citation, so fair enough. So I put that in the pinned comment and description. From my point of view, I explained my beliefs about subjectivity and made a reference for Joseph Anderson fans since I'm aware of the overlap. Gred understood the reference, and then he accused me of plagiarism because he understood what I wanted him to understand. I have no idea if this would be considered plagiarism in a courtroom setting because I'm not a lawyer, but I think it's pretty clear that it was not my intent to plagiarize the guy whose name is in the title of the video. I think my bigger issue with the plagiarism accusation is that when people think plagiarism, they think like Luke Stevens when he ripped off an entire H-Bomber Guy video, whereas this is a video that is already addressed to Joseph Anderson, where I say my belief system about subjectivity that has overlapping ideas with Joseph Anderson and then make a reference to one of his videos, and this is just like 2 or 3 sentences. And so for the P word to come out, that's a bit strong when people associate it with creators that literally don't think for themselves and rip off entire videos, when this is like a tiny, tiny snippet of one video where it's like, okay, I guess I could have had a citation there so that people who didn't get the reference would have known that I was referencing his video.
Feeble also neglects to touch upon the accusation of taking Matthew Matosis's idea of extrinsic and intrinsic rewards in Souls games, and regardless of whether it's plagiarism or not, I think it's fair to criticize Feeble for constantly regurgitating Matthew Matosis's and Joseph Anderson's talking points in his videos, particularly when he feels the need to defend his opinions, and even when he remembers to cite them. But this attitude towards plagiarism is troubling, especially given the context of Feeble making critiques of game sequels that reference Joseph Anderson's critiques of the original games. But don't worry too much, we won't go there, because I am not going to sit through all 7 hours of those videos. It is entirely likely that Feeble did not borrow any of Joseph Anderson's ideas for these videos, but you have to understand that having this laid back of a stance on plagiarism is a very bad look, because it casts doubt over your entire previous body of work. Here is a separate comment by Feeble on the matter, where he follows the textbook example of how to make an apology video on YouTube. Also, I was not trying to plagiarize Joe in my part of the critique where I talk about subjectivity. I was just stating my opinions about subjectivity, then because I knew it had overlap with Joe's opinions, I made a reference to his subjectivity is implied video with the intent that Joseph Anderson fans would understand the reference. I didn't think I had to cite a reference to a creator whose name is in the title of the video, but if that was wrong of me, I'm clarifying that here. What I mean when I say YouTuber apology video is dodging responsibility by basically saying I don't think what I did was wrong, but if you guys feel that way, then I'm sorry you feel that way. He fails at even that because he doesn't even try to sneak in the I'm sorry part. This is just another of many examples of why Gred calls Feeble toxic.
I hope I was clear. Come on.
Now, because this is the internet, I am probably going to be called biased, intellectually dishonest, morally bankrupt, and a simp if I don't criticize Gred a little. Given the context of this video, I should clarify that this is a joke, and I'm fully aware that I am hardly an unbiased third party. But while it is true that I find Gred's video pretty well written and cathartic, I do think he still could have done a better job. I think that stock footage is boring even though I get it, editing sucks sometimes. I think he often belabors the point a little too much, especially in the video's first half. He makes some unnecessary analogies. While I agree about the posture bar not being visible adds to the dopamine you get when it does break, I don't think it's that simple of a comparison to make to Skinnerbox psychology. He gets caught up in the weeds of the Nietzsche thing and spends too long talking about it when I don't really care about it too much, other than just being an example of Feeble misquoting something and it being fun to bring up later to tie suffering and its meaning to the core design of the Souls games. And while I agree with all his points about how the game works and its intended experience, I think it might detract from his main thesis that YouTube video game critiques are becoming shit, with some of his viewers who just simply hate From games. Despite that, I find myself agreeing with what Gred presents in his video. He even unreservedly apologizes for things like misattributing a quote in his pinned comment, practicing what he preaches about handling criticism, and then moving on with his life. Gred's video also helped me become aware of just how toxic I can be as well, and I think he has a great mentality on how the video creator should view their audience's criticisms, even when they are presented as a mean or hateful. I actually recently heard one of my favorite comedians talk about this very thing.
It's important for us to hear it all out and kind of think about, because there is, it's funny, in all the kind of waterfall of criticism and attacks that come, generally, there will be something somewhat constructive in some of it. And even though it's kind of a drag to sift through all of it, it is in some ways you are panning for gold in a, river, a torrent of, kind of shitty criticism. But sadly, you'll probably find a nugget or two where you're like, yeah, I should get better at that.
The reason I bring all this up is actually because whenever I discuss Gred's video on stream, a common thing I will see is people saying, I don't agree with everything, but I think it was a good video. I obviously don't expect people to write a dissertation in a Twitch chat message, and I also don't want this comment section to be only a circle jerk of hating on Feeble. So, I invite you to share your thoughts on what you agreed or disagreed with Gred's video, or even what you liked and didn't like as well, because I am a bit curious. One last housekeeping item is the kind of comments you will often see on Feeble's response videos. I don't want to generalize, so this is just my experience, but more often than not, you will see a small handful of people saying that Gred, and I for that matter, are toxic cultists who cannot fathom having a different opinion about their video game. Again, the point of Gred's video was not that he wants no other opinions. It's just that he wants critiques to be done not in a low-effort, ripped-off style that is for the purpose of roast comedy, and even that often taking a back seat to the critic responding to criticism and comment drama in their supposed review. He doesn't want the majority of all critiques on YouTube to become a bunch of copycats only talking about the negatives of a game each time one comes out, and playing it up for the drama despite them actually having a positive experience with the game, because it is negatively affecting how people perceive these games and the culture of how people discuss art as well. People might understand that if they watched the intro to Gred's video.
It's more of a response to a style of critique that has dominated video game culture on the internet for a very long time now. I'll be clear, when I talk about a style of critique, I don't just mean people who don't like the game that I like. This isn't about what people are saying, it is more about how they're saying it, and more importantly, what they're not saying. It's about how the role of the critic has changed and what we as the audience lose when critique is done in this way. And the hostility this sort of critique facilitates, not only between critic and audience, but audience and artist. If you don't like Shadow of the Erdtree or Elden Ring, I'm not arguing with you, you're allowed to not like it. Obviously, I'm a massive fanboy, I do challenge runs of this game, so I'm completely biased, but again, this is not a critique of the game, this is a critique of critiques.
Gred is arguing that Joseph Anderson and Feeble's style of critique is fatally flawed, and he simply wants them to be honest about how the game makes them really feel. He disagrees with Joe that good criticism should heavily focus on what is wrong and how it needs to improve, and that picking apart what you love in the name of improvement is the best way to critique. The irony of that is Joseph goes on to say that this style of critique has helped him improve in many ways, and that he doesn't just like dishing it out, he also enjoys getting it back. But says this in his Shadow of the Erdtree video after he spends a third of it bitching about the criticisms he has received. Gred also feels that their relationship with the art and their audiences is toxic, and he wants that to change. That way, we can all have an earnest discussion about these games. My advice is that if you want to make a video just focusing on the shortcomings of a game with a heavy focus on the mechanical perspective, then make that the emphasis of the video and communicate that in the intro and title rather than presenting it as a full critique. Simply aiming to do this will result in a video that is more coherent, concise, and productive because it will be more focused. Joseph Anderson said Shadow of the Erdtree was one of the best game experiences in recent memory and a huge improvement from the base game, and then went on a massive tirade that they need to change and get good, and anyone who disagrees is toxic. That's like the main point of the video. The issue was never negativity, it was sincerity. It was about telling people how you actually feel, and not just what you want fixed. Here is Gred's response to Feeble King's video. I woke up on Christmas morning to a little prezi from Feeble King. Guess I was on the naughty list. I have seen it now. A big section of my video was calling out the hypocrisy in critics who say Fromsoft fans can't handle criticism, while simultaneously feeling the need to create 40-minute response videos whenever they receive criticism. It'd be pretty hypocritical for me to do the same. I am not immune. While I don't agree with Feeble's criticism, he's entitled to give it. I'm confident in the way that I argued in my original video. Anything that I regret saying is already in the pinned comment, which was written in the first week of release. Anyone can form their own opinion by watching both videos and making up their own mind without me endlessly re-clarifying my talking points because I was misinterpreted. Feeble's thumbnail says that I lied. I don't think there's anything in his video that supports that whatsoever, but I expect most people will see that video for what it is. Just a dude getting really mad that I called him names. Edit. Feeble has since uploaded a video saying that I broke the law and defamed him. He posted a comment on my video echoing that sentiment. He's since taken down the video and edited that comment to remove any mention of law breaking. I was going to respond in some way, but if he's back down, then I don't see the need. Yup, that's right. Because it was the season of giving, Feeble decided to gift Gred another response video, despite saying this in his last video one day prior.
More than anything, I just want to be done with this, and I just want to put this behind me so that I can move on to greener pastures. If Gred responds to this video and then continues to call me a toxic gaslighter, sycophant, whatever, I'm probably just going to ignore it because I just don't want to deal with this part of the internet anymore.
And here we are. Feeble made a video claiming that what Gred said is illegal and constitutes defamation before taking it down within the hour. I think we're finally ready to have a look. Now, originally, I wanted to talk about the Death Knight discussion as part of my silly little stream react, but given how it seems to be the main basis for Feeble's accusations of illegal defamatory content, I want to do it a bit more justice, since it may be the most important argument, for Feeble anyways. Let's roll the clip.
I knew Gred's video was dishonest when I first saw it, but after further reflection, I've come to the conclusion that it may actually not be legal at all. Gred, you can't publicly lie and say that another person is guilty of gaslighting to avoid accepting fault, and to prove this point, use footage where you cut me off one line before I say, I think this was my fault.
The most ridiculous example of Feeble saying his audience misinterpreted him is when he talks about the Death Knights and says this.
I don't and never said that I disliked the Death Knights. I kind of liked the Death Knights. I just mentioned them in a list with the NPC bosses that I disliked and people assumed.
Insane. And again, textbook gaslighting. He's not only being unreasonable, he's being toxic by deflecting the criticisms.
I just mentioned them in a list with the NPC bosses that I disliked and people assumed. I think this is my fault for not being clearer. I think this is my fault. Do you know what it is called when you lie to 300,000 people to make me look bad? Defamation. It's one thing to misrepresent Nietzsche, but you can't break the law.
By the way, Feeble's arguments are the same in his first response video, but this clip is from the second, unpublished one. Now, first things first, this is yet another strawman argument. But in Feeble's defense, I'm pretty sure that this was just an honest misunderstanding. Gred is not saying that Feeble is gaslighting to avoid admitting that he is at fault. He is saying that Feeble is being toxic because toxic individuals struggle to admit when they are wrong. Gred is not saying that Feeble never admits when he is at fault. But even ignoring that in the context of just this example, Feeble only says that he thinks it's his fault that his audience assumed wrong, still partially blaming his audience for correctly interpreting what he had presented. His audience did not assume that Feeble hated the Death Knights. They were told that he did not like the Death Knights because he uses them as an example of why the mini-boss quality is terrible.
As I'll get into later, many of the Remembrance bosses feel less like rewards and more like punishments, and the mini-boss quality is terrible. Most Cave or Catacombs bosses are just buffed up normal enemies that don't pose much challenge, and when it's something else, it's usually an NPC or a reskin Death Knight. And you know what the funny part is about all of that? I don't and never said that I disliked the Death Knights. I kind of liked the Death Knights. I just mentioned them in a list with the NPC bosses that I disliked and people assumed. I think this is my fault for not being clearer, but to blow up this nitpick to the extent that the comments did is an example of real-time brain rot.
Pulling up comments and blaming the audience for criticizing him and making them out to be a mob bent on undermining his entire critique over a single nitpick is another reason why Gred calls Feeble toxic, because he is deflecting and downplaying criticisms of his video and blaming his audience. Gred said that this is the most ridiculous example of Feeble saying that his audience misinterpreted him, not that Feeble never admits fault. This might sound like semantics, but I feel that it does show that Feeble is struggling to take the full L, and I think the preamble leading up to this statement makes the problem even worse, but we'll talk about that in a minute. For now, we have gone over plenty examples already of Feeble showing that he struggles to admit when he was wrong. And that's not even to mention the fact that Feeble in this video is threatening legal action over how he handled his discussion of a video game boss. So let's talk now about the gaslighting instead. To be clear for Feeble, gaslighting is a subjective opinion. Gred is not accusing Feeble of something illegal. It is an assessment of someone's behavior, much like the Sycophant label. Now, Gred says textbook gaslighting, but doesn't really spend any time defining what gaslighting is, and I think it leaves room for confusion. Gaslighting is many things, including playing the victim, shifting blame onto others, subtly, partially, or otherwise, using dismissive language, posturing themselves as the person that you can trust, and manipulating your memory of events, to name a few. This video in the description may be helpful if you are unsure if you are being gaslit, and I thought it would be a good framework to approach the topic of whether or not someone is a gaslighter, because it shows that gaslighting is not some simple black and white thing. Calling someone a gaslighter is a tricky thing because it is not just one thing. It is a combination and a history of some or all of these things to serve a person's interests. Gaslighting is a spectrum of behavior. It can be the result of intentional sociopathy, or it can even be done without the gaslighter being consciously aware of their behavior. A gaslighter's intentions can be very unclear and quite hard to guess, but again, intent is irrelevant. Now, let's look at some examples of this in action, and at the risk of being sued by Feeble for defamation, I do want to preface it by saying that I am going to do my best to understand Feeble's opinion, and when I say that it is gaslighting behavior, it is my subjective opinion. I also want to say that usually any example will likely overlap several categories of gaslighting, but I am just doing some quick examples here to demonstrate why I think that Feeble's gaslighting is far from isolated to just his take on the Death Knights. I think that the first part of this video already provides some compelling examples as well, but I'll try not to rehash those again. And without further ado,
And to clear up another thing, worst DLC yet does not mean terrible. I don't think Fromsoft has ever made a terrible DLC. Of course, regardless of this all being true, it won't make many Fromsoft fans any less mad at me, which brings me to my next point, my problems with the Fromsoft community. I have made content about Fromsoft, Zelda, Persona, anime, Capcom, Bethesda, and God of War, and hands down, no contest, Fromsoft has the worst community. And Zelda was just a bunch of 12-year-olds screaming at me for not liking Tears of the Kingdom, and Fromsoft is still worse. I think my main issue with the community is this. I will make a statement, and a Fromsoft fan will point out that there is more to the conversation, therefore I am wrong. It is very annoying. Yes, the games are obscure, but did it ever occur to you that I leave information out of my videos because I think it's boring and I want the video to have good pacing, unlike this one?
playing the victim. Pretty straightforward one here, I think. So we'll keep the ball rolling with another example.
Last time I criticized Dark Souls 3 for lacking creativity, I was met with comments telling me that I'm stupid because Dark Souls 3 has differences not found in other FromSoft games.
Playing the victim over criticisms from people disagreeing with his assessment that Dark Souls 3 and Shadow of the Erdtree areas lack creativity. One more example of playing the victim, because I can't stop finding these for some reason.
Toxicity in the FromSoft community. So I said it's the worst community. Why do I think that? With the FromSoft community, I'll make a video that's negative, and then some of these videos that are almost 3 years old now are still getting daily angry comments about why I'm stupid and wrong and all of that stuff. Some of the comments are a lot worse than other ones. They're not all just good. Some of them are a lot nastier. But in general, my main issue with the toxicity isn't necessarily the toxicity. I guess I can be a little toxic myself too. My bigger issue is the quantity of how it never ends. It's like, I'm going to get roasted for my take on Shadow of the Erdtree and Dark Souls 2 until, like, I swear to God, it's going to continue for the next 10 years in my YouTube studio. The only way to make the comments stop so that I could reclaim my YouTube studio would be to deactivate all comments on FromSoft videos to divorce myself from the community. I probably won't do that, but the fact that I feel pressured to is something that would only happen in the FromSoft community. I will say that my bigger issue with some of the comments that I showed in my video is not the toxicity, it was just the fact that they weren't very smart.
Okay, enough's enough. Let's move on to our next criteria.
There were some minor issues with my last video that the comment section used to invalidate all of my negative opinions as objectively incorrect. However, after much reflection, I realized that the biggest mistake that I made was not being negative enough.
Shifting the blame. He does say that his video had minor issues, but is again blaming the criticisms on commenters and saying they are only using this as ammo to try and invalidate all of his opinions. Here's another quick one.
Let me say that I don't think "in defense of" needs to mean that I am wholly in love with what I am defending. All it means is that I'm presenting some sort of defense that is more positive than what I and many others have put out previously, which is exactly what that video is. I think a lot of people who watch my videos don't really listen to me when I speak. They see a flashy thumbnail, watch 5 minutes, dislike, and leave.
This is from his original Shadow of the Erdtree video again. And these unnecessary comments are downplaying his audience's confusion towards his plethora of Elden Ring videos, and saying they aren't really listening to him, and suggesting that some of them are doing it to accuse him of being a grifter, rather than him just being bad at writing or clearly presenting his opinions. You know what? Here's one more.
To conclude this video, all I have to say is that to all these conspiracy theorists who are like, oh, people who disagree with me don't exist, they're just grifting to get views, you're kind of crazy. Yeah, people who disagree with you exist. I'm not thinking people who like Shadow of the Erdtree don't exist, because how could somebody disagree with my opinion? Because it's so true. Like, no, I don't think that way. That's such a weird way to think. I didn't like the DLC, thought it was quite a bit worse than all the other ones that I played. I talked about it. I said it wasn't terrible, so it was in between not good and terrible, which would be around a 4 to a 5 out of 10, and that was it. I didn't think it was that unclear, but Gred certainly does. So no, the reason why there's been more negative video essays on YouTube is not a conspiracy to grift to get views. It's just that there's a declining games industry, so negativity in the videos has become more dominant.
If I have to explain how blatant of a strawman argument this is, then I have failed in this video. And I know Gred made the exact same mistake already, but we are going to move on to the gaslighting anyways. Feeble is shifting the blame onto Gred for not reading between the lines of his confusing critique and understanding that he thought Shadow of the Erdtree was a 4.5 out of 10. Not to mention that Feeble is downplaying the criticism that he is playing up the negativity for views by construing it as some conspiracy theorists saying that if you simply have a negative opinion, you are a grifter. He is also calling Gred, or I guess nebulous people that share his criticism, crazy, and calling into question their mental stability, which is an aspect of gaslighting that I neglected to mention earlier. This is also one of many examples of Feeble trying to portray criticisms of his video as people disagreeing about just his opinion of the video game itself, rather than the method of his critique.
To everyone who commented that the video was bad because I said the Death Knights were reskinned, you are the perfect example of missing the forest for the trees. Don't get caught up in the tiny details of every argument. That isn't where you'll find any truth.
Using dismissive language. Feeble is telling his audience who had issues with calling the Death Knights a reskinned enemy that the problem is their own because they get too hung up on minor details of his critique, rather than only engaging with what he considers his main point to be. It is dismissal of their problem despite it being a reasonable criticism. Next.
I feel like when I'm talking to a Fromsoft fan specifically, they're the only community where all my arguments just go over their head. They just don't understand what I'm saying. And it's almost like when what I'm saying is, I don't like it, they're like, sorry, that doesn't make any sense. Sorry, you didn't like a part of the game. Sorry, that doesn't comprehend with my brain. You can't say that because that doesn't make any sense. And it's like, okay, this isn't an experience I have with other communities where people are just misinterpreting me to this extent.
Pretty straightforward example here, portraying the Fromsoft community as people who are too stupid to understand art critique and are incapable of fathoming that people can disagree on opinions of a video game.
Gred claims that the main force driving increased negativity towards From Software isn't consumers having opinions or quantity over quality game design, but instead critics who are brainwashing the masses for views into disliking the games.
We're not at a point where FromSoft has failed to respond to criticism and players are turning on them. Players are turning on them because for over a decade now, they've been fed hour-long video essays telling them all the reasons their favorite masterpiece is actually garbage.
This is just beyond ridiculous. I just didn't like Shadow of the Erdtree, and now he's like creating this whole fantasy in his head. It's like they're all lying because nobody could think the thing I like is not good because I like it. It's like, okay there, bud.
More dismissive language. Not to mention that Feeble does gymnastics here to avoid arguing anything substantial about Gred's criticism. Forgive me for this side tangent, but I want to remind everyone that Gred is not simply saying that critics are brainwashing people into not liking his favorite game, or saying that you can't have a negative opinion about a game. Gred can fathom that some people dislike art that he likes. What he can't fathom is why people who like what he likes are being so condescending towards it. He is saying that people are having their perception of all games negatively affected by the tidal wave of roast comedy, smug talking points, destructive criticism, and yes, misinformation that seems to be inherent to this style of critique. He is showing that this problem in the style of a critique that isn't a critique is affecting the culture of how we discuss art, and he is showing the effect of that because it is ruining the discourse of From games right now. It's stunting people's ability to appreciate or even recognize good art, and when they spread misinformation because they don't care enough to get things right, it poisons the entire well of discussion. In any event, Feeble says that he just didn't like Shadow of the Erdtree, that people think it's not good, and Gred can't understand that. But what Feeble doesn't understand is that this video is not about him. This part of the video is not addressed to him. Joseph Anderson is the guy in the thumbnail. Joseph Anderson did like Shadow of the Erdtree, and so do many of his imitators, but they are again only focused on making jokes at the game's expense. Feeble is also guilty of focusing on the negatives in games that he really enjoyed, because that is the style of video that inspired his YouTube channel. The other reason I think this is a bad argument is because Feeble calls the assessment that people like Joseph are the biggest cause for negativity towards Fromsoft ridiculous, and then goes on to not give his thoughts on why he thinks that isn't the case or argue this notion. Rather, he just states that some people don't like quantity over quality design, and people are allowed to say they think something is bad. This is again ignoring the fact on how it is said, who it is said to, and how it is presented, and it is downplaying the fact that these critics, including Feeble, are getting millions of views and have enormous influence on the community. It's not just one guy named Joseph Anderson not liking or liking a game. It's one guy shitting on a game to millions of viewers, with dozens, if not hundreds of copycats stealing his format and talking points to amplify this rhetoric. Intent is irrelevant. Feeble then goes on to say why he believes that there is nothing wrong with solely focusing on the negative aspects of things that you enjoy for no other reason than he just has more things to talk about.
He also really doesn't like how Joseph Anderson and videos like his will say they like something and then focus on the negatives. I didn't do this on my Shadow of the Erdtree video because I didn't like the game and I focused on the negatives. So there's two things to talk about here. First of all, there's nothing wrong with focusing on the negatives about something you like. Sometimes the things that you like about art are fairly simple and there isn't much stuff to go into in conversation, and the things you dislike you can talk about a lot more. One example of that for me would be something like Bleach. I like Bleach. I've been watching it. I think it's a good anime. But if I was to write everything that I dislike about it, the essay would be longer because I think it does some things wrong. The other issue he had with it is that he thought the amount of negativity in my video would warrant me thinking the game is terrible, and then I said it isn't terrible, which confused him. And he couldn't read between the lines and then understand that meant the score would be something like around a 4 or 5 or in between terrible and not good, which is a rating. But instead of coming to that conclusion, he came to the conclusion that I'm lying for views.
No reason as to why he thinks this is okay, fair, valid, more entertaining, makes his critiques better, or is better for the discussion of art. No self-reflection as to why he finds it easier to create a list of things he dislikes about something that he enjoys than it is to discuss what he enjoyed about it and why. More things to say equals better. It speaks towards this childish view of art critique as nothing more than listing things that you thought were good and bad and totaling them up as a value judgment on the art as if it was a product to be reviewed. Shout out to this absolutely based-ass commenter on Gred's video, who I think may hold the answer to Feeble's questions as to why he doesn't get smarter comments on his Fromsoft videos. He seems to not understand that making a negative video and insulting the people who disagree with you as well as the artists they like will not exactly garner a wave of positive feedback, well thought out replies, and constructive criticism in his comment section. Negativity begets negativity. It is absolutely no surprise that many people in his audience are not willing to engage with Feeble's opinions and interpretations of the game in a well-reasoned and thoughtful manner when they feel insulted.
My bigger issue with some of the comments that I showed in my video is not the toxicity, it was just the fact that they weren't very smart. Like when the comment compared Dark Souls 2 DLC's worst part with the frigid outskirts to the Death Knight complaint, I said that this was brain rot because it's obviously not my main complaint with the game was not the Death Knights, and I said in the description of my video that I said Dark Souls 2 DLC is better if you skip the co-op bosses, so you're comparing something that wasn't even in the comparison to something that is not my main argument. A better way of doing this would be saying, oh, so you think Dark Souls 2 DLC is better than Shadow of the Erdtree because Shadow of the Erdtree has too much empty space, poor extrinsic rewards, and too much trial and error in learning the bosses, and so on and so forth. Those would be my central arguments, but instead people are just going to pick apart the part that they dislike the most of the video, and then that's the argument, and that upsets me. Also, some people might defend this comment saying that maybe they didn't read the description and I should have included the information about the Dark Souls 2 DLC in the video, and fair enough, maybe I should have, but my bigger issue with the comment is that he's nitpicking the Death Knights, which are very clearly not my biggest criticism of the DLC, just to try to make me look bad when that isn't the central argument, so it's just a bad faith argument. And I think there are a lot of comments that I saw like that are just obviously in bad faith.
Speaking of critique as a value judgment, Gred also has an entire video dedicated to this very topic, so go add that to your watch later playlist if you want. In his Lost Art of Critique video though, Gred goes on at length in his Role of the Critic section about what he thinks constitutes a basic critique, and that truly great critique is about teaching people how to think about art, so he can speak for himself regarding that topic. Regardless, in the full clip, you can see Gred is saying all of this because he is trying to point out that Joseph's ominous warning and soapbox preaching about the downfall of Fromsoft is moronic, given that he is the single worst propagator of toxicity towards Fromsoft games, through his videos and through his unoriginal imitators.
Both Joseph Anderson and Feeble King call Souls fans the most toxic in the games industry, but they're referring to people who glaze and engage in toxic positivity. No, guys, this is the most toxic thing about the Souls community, this mentality of giving a review of a game they think is a masterpiece, but only talking about the negative aspects of it. Now, I'll be clear, I make no insinuations that this game is perfect or above criticism.
Joseph is instead trying to warn us that the positivity of the FromSoft fandom will one day soon turn to toxicity, and that is what will be FromSoft's undoing. Gred is saying that Joseph's self-proclaimed motivation of preventing toxicity doesn't make any logical sense with his goal. Joseph claims he is nitpicking and harshly criticizing art that he loves because he doesn't want the fans and developers to get too big of an ego and become toxic. But if his goal is to reduce toxicity, then why does he make so many memes at the game's expense and spend his review calling his audience names? His critique is way more toxic and spreads way more toxicity than people simply liking the game the way it is and disagreeing with his perceived problems. Moreover, he tries to tell us that the real toxicity is not ridiculing art unceremoniously, but rather people who disagree with his views of game design and simply like the game the way it is. He calls this toxic positivity. He spends so much time complaining about toxic FromSoft fans, but he himself is the biggest one. Again, Feeble ignores this part of the discussion and seems more interested in discussing the fact that he's allowed to be negative about things, rather than giving his 2 cents on whether critics like him contribute to toxicity. To sound like a broken record, having a negative opinion is not toxic. Conveying that negative opinion in both an inauthentic and mean way is toxic. It's about how it is said.
There is nothing that he is saying that puts him at risk other than the occasional comment that tells him that he sucks at the game. Joseph says that he's worried that the toxic positivity of fans will continue to suppress the issues of the game to a point where the toxic positivity will turn into toxic negativity. I don't know if he's been on the internet in the last few months, but that is happening right now, and Shadow of the Erdtree is good. Joe thinks so himself. We're not at Skyrim. We're not at a point where FromSoft has failed to respond to criticism and players are turning on them. Players are turning on them because for over a decade now, they've been fed hour-long video essays telling them all the reasons their favorite masterpiece is actually garbage. They're full to bursting with smug talking points about how the game failed to teach them essential mechanics, and that's why Mesmer pushed their shit in. Joseph Anderson made a 90-minute critique of the DLC, which he loved, and only a fraction of it is him saying what he liked. Most of it is him doing his usual roast comedy shtick, and the rest of it is him responding to his own critics. He spends such a small portion of this positive review actually telling us why he had such an amazing time with it. That is toxic negativity. It's just regular toxicity, and it's not critique.
Now, let's get back to the gaslighting examples. We'll move on from dismissive language because we are going to be seeing a lot of it anyways as we continue. Friendly reminder that gaslighting isn't real, you're fucking crazy.
Accusation that he plays up his negativity for views, that he's rage baiting, he says this.
Maybe I'm trying to keep up the pacing of the video and I don't want to talk about things I find boring. Or, what if I'm an evil grifter sent from outer space to convince the people of Earth that FromSoft fell off?
I mean, bro, I don't even have to say much about this one. How can you put this in your video and then accuse your audience of strawman arguments in the same breath?
Oh my god, a joke is an obvious strawman argument. You lost me, man. You lost me. That federal hearing about the aliens, that was about me. Okay, so there's a lot wrong with what Gred just did here. First of all, Gred, do you actually believe that I think other people believe that I am an alien grifter sent from outer space to convince the people of Earth that FromSoft fell off, and that I think other people think that the federal hearing about aliens was about me, the YouTuber? Do you think that I think that? Or do you think that that is a joke that I put in the video? And are you so unable to detect humor that you thought I was being serious? Like, I actually, I don't know anymore if this is a parody after you said that was a strawman argument. Also, by a literal definition, this is not a straw man argument. I was presenting two options. I never actually said in the video that I think other people think I'm an alien sent from outer space, because, like, who would really think that unless you're literally schizophrenic? Like, I'm so confused. I never actually specified that I thought other people think that, because I don't. But obviously, if I said that, I would either be schizophrenic, insane, or joking. So it's like, what's the most likely outcome? So no, it's not a straw man because I never specified other people think that. And obviously, even if it was, it's a joke. So yeah, Gred, next time you watch my video, if I start talking about me being an alien and that people think federal hearings are about me, I don't actually think that.
I'm going to use this clip as my example of posturing oneself as the person you can trust, because he is trying to sow doubt about Gred's social cues or possibly his IQ by ridiculing him, and again deflecting the criticism of him presenting strawman arguments about his critics. Here is a bonus example, though.
Feeble says that he's sick of toxic commenters using straw man arguments. Well, let's see. What is a straw man argument? A straw man argument is when someone...
Straw man argument is when you say that I'm toxic for not accepting blame, even though I accept it in the next sentence. That would be one. You know, another example of a straw man in this video would be that one time that you said, but Feeble King said Elden Ring's one of his favorite games, then he says he doesn't like it. That's not my fucking argument. I said the base game is one of my favorite games. I said I didn't like the DLC. They're not the same game. They're two separate things in the same game, but, you know, sold separately. They're different products.
Feeble interrupts the part where Gred reiterates again that Joseph Anderson making jokes is still a form of strawman. So maybe this is why he didn't realize that Gred can understand humor, but I digress. We have already gone over some examples as to why I think it is in fact Feeble strawmanning Gred, not the other way around. But just to quickly reiterate, Gred is not saying that he is inconsistent for liking the base game but not the DLC. As for the Death Knight part, I will reiterate that Gred is not saying that Feeble never admits fault.
This seemed especially deceptive because he cut off the sentence before I would say, I think that I was in the wrong for this, and then puts on screen, he's a gaslighter who never admits when he's wrong. And it's like, okay, like, this is weird. You're really just editing me to make me look bad. To me, it almost appears like if my apology is not, I'm 100% in the wrong, all of the comments are 100% in the right, please forgive me, Miyazaki. If that's not the apology, it's like Gred doesn't even hear it. I did say that the Death Knight issue was my fault and I should have been clear. I said that in the sentence where you cut me off.
We've talked a little about this, but here Feeble mentions that it seems like no apology is good enough for Gred unless it is done without taking complete responsibility and is a full apology. This is not to say that situations and disagreements don't have any nuance and that one party is ever fully in the right. The problem is that I still haven't seen an apology from Feeble that isn't accompanied along with these gaslighting practices, hand-wringing, and just making a big deal about it in general. Also, he is now saying some of the comments he took issue with, when in his follow-up video he just said the comments, which was kind of generalizing the people that took issue with his point about the Death Knights. It's subtle, but gaslighting often involves making you doubt your memory by lying about the small details that you are less likely to confidently remember.
That doesn't mean that there weren't any good points brought up in Gred's video, but I think a lot of the character assassination against me is him looking way too deeply into things that are fairly simple and overcomplicating everything while crafting narratives about why the people who make videos he doesn't like are intentionally disingenuous, when that couldn't be further from the truth. We're just people who don't see eye to eye with you.
Again, trying to paint Gred as a character assassin desperate to weave false narratives from nothing simply because people don't like a video game that he likes. And Feeble as part of a sane collective of critics who are being targeted for not seeing eye to eye with other gamers. There are a few others that come to mind when he talks about Fromsoft fans, but I don't want to bog this down too much, and we will get to some more examples in his Death Knight discussion later. And oddly enough, his Defamation video, where he spends a good deal of time talking about the critical minds versus the Fromsoft fanboys.
This entire style of criticism is built on bad faith arguments. If you love a game and your entire critique is shitting on it, then it is an inauthentic critique.
I don't love Shadow of the Erdtree. And also, I just completely disagree with you on this point. I could totally love something and then just make a video on the negatives to try to improve it. That's what someone like Raditosker does. But also, I don't love Shadow of the Erdtree. You're just wrong. You can like something and have a video with a lot of flaws, because sometimes the flaws are more complicated than the good parts and you have more to say about the flaws, so they take up more time in the video, right? Like, this shouldn't be too hard to understand.
Manipulating your memory. I'm going to use this clip as my first example because Feeble is saying that it's obvious that he didn't like Shadow of the Erdtree over and over again, when one of Gred's main points was that no one can decipher what Feeble actually thinks about the DLC because everyone who watches his video seems to think he thought it was terrible. And all Feeble offers in his 1-hour follow-up is him aloofly saying that he doesn't think it's terrible, without actually elaborating what he thinks it is then. He cuts the part where Gred makes the crux of this argument.
You presented it as your critique. It doesn't represent how you actually feel.
I don't like Shadow of the Erdtree. That's how I feel. Did you not get that from the video?
If you didn't think it was terrible, then your review is in bad faith.
No, it's not. I think it's below average, and you could say it's terrible for a FromSoft product. That would probably be true.
If you didn't think it was terrible, then your review is in bad faith, because that's not the critique that you present. You're either making your arguments in bad faith, or you are a bad critic. Pick one. You made a bad video, and you angered your audience. Then you made a follow-up review, gaslighting your audience that actually they got it all wrong, and they misinterpreted you, and they're being toxic.
It's reinforcement through repetition, which does affect people's memory. Not to mention, Gred is showing videos where Feeble did use this negative style towards games he loved, like Elden Ring and Sekiro. Videos where he himself has said that they are mostly negative. Moreover, Gred has already explained that he believes it is possible to make a video that is focused on the negative as long as you effectively communicate that intention to the audience, like what Matthew Matosis did with Dark Souls 2.
Despite spending your career nitpicking and tearing apart the games you critique, when people do that in your comments, you flip out. That is a double standard.
Depends on the comment. I dislike the Strawman comments, like how you were doing Strawman arguments. The reason you dislike the bosses is because you said they have too much health. And then it's like, okay, yeah, some of them, especially Bale, kind of push my buttons, Bale and Radon specifically, but that was not the main thing that I cited, especially in my last video. So you're just doing Strawman arguments. A lot of the comments do Strawman arguments because you're so fucking desperate to prove me wrong when I'm just a guy with opinions on the internet.
You are not in the business of game development. You are in the business of games journalism. If you want to fix FromSoft, then go fill out a job application and send them a resume.
Bro, I'm not Japanese. What are you talking about? I can't do that. I don't speak the language. This is such a weird thing to say. That it's like, if you're not the game designer, you can't have negative opinions in your video. It's like, no, man, it's just a YouTube video, man. I don't know why you're so insane about this.
Sorry, I just wanted to let that one play a little. I'll leave a spot the gaslighting homework assignment for you for the first half of that clip. Anyways, Feeble is trying to suggest that Gred is saying that you cannot have negative opinions about the game unless you're a game designer, which is a total straw man. Gred is not saying you can't have negative opinions about games unless you are a game designer. He is saying that being a game designer should not be the point of critique, and Feeble is seemingly trying to make people forget that. Gred says that the point of critique should not be trying to fix the art by making an unsolicited list of all the things that are bad about it and then trying to frame this as a good, selfless deed for the creator's benefit. Feeble is also trying to make us forget the intro and outro of his video where Gred bookends it by saying everyone is entitled to their opinions of the art, and their opinions on what they feel critique should be. Gred is addressing the fact that Joseph Anderson seems confused as to what his job as a critic is, and is clarifying that he does not want critics feeling the need to be game designers. He wants critique that elicits appreciation or understanding of the art. Not to mention that Gred a minute later says you are allowed to dislike a game, but then trying to fix it in your image is a futile endeavor, especially when you are flaming people who disagree with you.
You completely misunderstand the key concepts of what makes these games what they are. You're allowed to dislike it. You're not just saying, this isn't for me. You're saying, this isn't for me, and it should be, so let's change it. And anyone that doesn't like your suggestions of change are engaging in toxic positivity. Well, that's just toxic. That's just regular toxicity. Everything you say in this section of the review is far more toxic than any get-good skill issue comment will ever be.
I think this element of accusing people of toxicity when the commenters disagree with their suggestions of change is what is the truly problematic part for Gred, because he mentions that a few times and says it at the top of his description. The focus of the video is the style of critique that both Joseph Anderson and Feeble King affect, and the accusations of toxicity, both negative and positive, that they recently made in their respective Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree critiques.
Some people misunderstood my last video because I said some FromSoft fans argued like they were in a cult. So commenters created a straw man saying that I said everyone who disagrees with me is in a cult. I never said that. That would be outrageous. Feel free to disagree. I'm not a Disney villain or a politician. I simply think that if you keep up the narrative that all interpreted flaws are the result of player incompetence and not just having subjective differences, then you are arguing like you are in a cult, since the argument only works from the perspective that I'm at fault for disliking something that's subjectively great.
Now, this one is a bit tricky because Feeble is arguing that he never said that everyone who disagrees with me is in a cult, which is technically true, but also the kind of thing a manipulator would say. A common misconception about memory manipulation is that it is just blatantly lying about past events, but anything that affects people's ability to accurately recall events can be memory manipulation, such as Feeble focusing on the things that he didn't say rather than what he did say. And regardless of this form of gaslighting, it's downplaying the emotions of people who were upset by what he said. If you say something that hurts someone, it's not their fault for not understanding what you meant or that you didn't mean it towards them. But he still doesn't really apologize for this. It's like if you bump into someone on the sidewalk and hurt them, and when they look up at you while clutching their knee, you say, "Well, I didn't mean to knock you over," instead of saying, "I'm sorry." Intent is irrelevant. He goes on to clarify that he meant people who are arguing from the perspective that every problem you might have with a game is actually the fault of the player and not the game. The problem is, I have yet to see these people who argue this way, but more importantly, this is not how I interpreted Feeble's use of calling people cult-like in his original Shadow of the Erdtree video, even now. It really does sound like he meant it towards people that disagree with his opinion of the difficulty, and people who disagree with his assessment that using game mechanics are unfun and skipping learning the boss. He says now that he meant people who argue like the problems are inherently yours and never the game's are being cult-like. But in his original video, he describes people that argue this way as Fromsoft fans. I may be totally wrong, and Feeble may have just written this part poorly, but I can definitely see how people might think it was meant for them. You decide for yourself. Let's roll the clip.
I feel like I'm seeing an almost cult-like response from some FromSoft fans against the difficulty criticism. They'll say things like, "You're complaining that the games known for being hard are hard. Stop complaining, get good." I think this sentiment is so absurdly stupid on so many levels. Firstly, hard doesn't and has never equated to good game design. FromSoft creates entertainment. These games are not sacred relics with challenges that are inherently good because it's technically possible to do every boss hitless if you look up a guide, or spend an obscene amount of hours doing trial and error deaths fighting it. It's uncanny to me how cult-like this community can be. I think it's rooted in the fact that FromSoft made a reputation for designing hard games that weren't actually hard. Dark Souls 1 isn't hard, it's just unique, and it punishes people who don't try to learn its unique mechanics. With Shadow of the Erdtree, this is completely not true at all. This game is absurdly difficult for the sake of being difficult. Whenever I find a new boss, it doesn't feel rewarding, it feels like a punishment. Time to get hit a few times, try to heal, and die. I'm certain a counter-argument to my criticisms is that I should just use summons or an overpowered build if I dislike the boss mechanics. But me using split aggro or an overpowered build to ignore the mechanics doesn't make me like learning the boss mechanics. Skipping boss mechanics doesn't make me enjoy them, and I am tired of this brain-dead FromSoft cult-like response to avoid all criticism, and to act like their game has no flaws because you can skip some parts of it if you don't like it. Part of the reason I find it so annoying to argue with FromSoft fans is because they always start every conversation from the perspective that every complaint is your fault in some way, get good, Miyazaki games are inherently perfect. It's so brain-dead, like they aren't individuals who think for themselves, but cult members preaching their creed.
I had to break that clip in half as it is around 5 minutes in length. So if you still have reservations that I may be clip farming here, please go watch his original Shadow of the Erdtree video. The timestamp I will give you is at 18 minutes and 27 seconds to around 22 minutes and 36 seconds. But suffice to say that even if he is clarifying who he meant are cultists now, there is no apology or acknowledgement of his audience's feelings over the misunderstanding. Not here or in his pinned comment. He is blaming his audience for misunderstanding him again. Oh, and he also lumps in Gred and says that he is a cult, that he argues in a cult-like fashion.
Okay, so what I'm saying here is I do not think the people who disagree with me or the DLC are in a cult, meaning that if you have an opinion that is not mine, you are not in a cult. The way that a percentage of FromSoft fans, including you, argue is cult-like. And then I go on to explain the reason why is because if everything is always my fault for not enjoying the game, it's an argument made under the assumption that the game is inherently enjoyable and that all negatives someone might have is their own fault. That is the point. That argument has a cult-like reverence to it. That's what I'm saying. You're reducing the argument and ignoring some key words to understand what I'm saying.
And forgive me if I'm a bit confused, but I still don't understand the distinction that Feeble makes here. He says that the point he was trying to make is people who argue that there is no problem with the game and that the problem is with you are cult-like. but I don't see how this is any different than people simply disagreeing with him about the game. What makes it cult-like? If someone disagrees with Feeble that the combat is bad because they like spirit summons or using a stronger build than him or co-oping with their friends, why is that automatically a cult-like argument? They're not trying to force their opinion onto Feeble as he claims, any more than Feeble is trying to force his opinion onto his audience when he expresses it. They're not trying to invalidate his opinion, they just disagree with his assessment. Remember when we said that this level of critique can only hope to garner vapid discussion like, I disagree with your value judgment? Apparently, if you respond this way, you're a fanboy without a critical mind. Oh, my bad. That joke won't make sense until later. Either way, its subjectivity is implied for me, but not for thee, all over again. It's like Gred's point of the subjectivity being implied for his comments as well went right over his head. I feel like Feeble would rather dig himself into a hole like this instead of apologizing for hurting the feelings of his fans who took issue with thinking that they were being called brainwashed cultists, or calling Fromsoft developers absurdly lazy for that matter. So we'll move on.
How is you saying you're in a cult any different to you saying you're being cult-like?
That's not the important distinction. That is not, you're completely missing the point of the quote. I've explained it several times, but you completely missed the point of what I was saying there, man.
I will clarify one more time on Gred's behalf. The point was not who he meant it about. The point was that his audience felt insulted. Okay, I think that's more psychoanalysis than anyone really cared for. But it is important to remember that all these examples in isolation can be understandable for sure, but it is this constant pattern of behavior that leads Gred to the conclusion that Feeble is a gaslighter. Now, bringing it back to the Death Knight debacle. If we actually watch the extended clip of Feeble discussing the Death Knight blowback, we can see this pattern of gaslighting emerging once again. Posturing FromSoft fans as people who miss the forest for the trees, downplaying this criticism because it is a minor part of his video, suggesting that people bringing up this one criticism are trying to invalidate the entirety of his video and all other opinions to paint him as disingenuous, and then hits us with, I never actually said I disliked the Death Knights. I actually liked the Death Knights. Despite him talking about them in a list of examples to support his argument that the mini-boss quality is terrible.
Due to their argumentative nature, I think FromSoft fans often miss the forest for the trees. One example of this is when I said Shadow of the Erdtree had reskinned Death Knights. This is 5 words of a 7,000-word essay that the comments used to discredit all of my opinions as disingenuous. And you know what the funny part is about all of that? I don't and never said that I disliked the Death Knights. I kind of liked the Death Knights. I just mentioned them in a list with the NPC bosses that I disliked and people assumed. I think this is my fault for not being clearer, but to blow up this nitpick to the extent that the comments did is an example of real-time brain rot.
While it is true that he does admit to probably being at fault, its impact is softened by all the hand-wringing that leads up to it. And this kind of bombshell is what Gred means when he says it's hard to understand Feeble's critiques. This is also what Gred meant when he said textbook gaslighting. Gred is not saying Feeble is gaslighting because he avoids admitting fault. You can admit fault, partially or otherwise, and it can still be gaslighting if you are downplaying your audience's feelings, shifting some of the blame onto them, and minimizing the issue. Not to mention manipulating your memory when he says, I never actually said I disliked the Death Knights. I actually kind of liked the Death Knights. Regardless of whether he accepts fault for that, or if it is true that he never literally said the words, I dislike the Death Knights, it is still clouding people's recollection. He says the Death Knights were simply in a list of other bosses he disliked and people assumed, but neglects to mention that the lists that Feeble used them in were examples to support his argument that the mini-boss quality is terrible. Gred is also not saying that Feeble is gaslighting to avoid admitting fault. He is saying that he is gaslighting his audience to deflect reasonable criticisms of his critique.
The most ridiculous example of Feeble saying his audience misinterpreted him is when he talks about the Death Knights and says this.
I don't and never said that I disliked the Death Knights. I kind of liked the Death Knights. I just mentioned them in a list with the NPC bosses that I disliked and people assumed.
Insane. And again, textbook gaslighting. What do you mean you included them in a list of things you didn't like and your audience assumed you didn't like them? What else are they supposed to assume? If you tell me something tastes like shit, am I supposed to assume you enjoyed it? Do you enjoy the taste of shit? With the information that he presented in his critique, what assumption could his audience possibly come to? He's not only being unreasonable, he's being toxic by deflecting the criticisms, genuine, reasonable criticisms, and putting it on them. He's calling them toxic, and that is classic gaslighting.
This is why this little gotcha moment where Feeble shows the part where he says, I think this is my fault for not being clearer, is meaningless. It doesn't disprove anything that Gred has said. Feeble goes on to show an example of a comment trying to undermine his entire review because of the Death Knight comment, and suggests that other comments are blowing up on this nitpick. Now, I do sympathize a little with Feeble here. The culture of YouTube comments is honestly quite frustrating. So many comments feel the need to have this veneer of smugness, memes, and sarcasm, and it's very annoying. However, the underlying criticism is still valid, and it takes thick skin to accept that and learn to not get mad over every mean comment, something I myself have failed at in the past pretty badly. But to call the comments that point this out real-time brain rot is gaslighting. It's calling into question the person's mental well-being, and not just one person, but all the comments pointing out this criticism. This is also why Gred calls Feeble toxic for taking genuine criticisms of his critique and calling them brain rot and saying they are overblowing this issue. Not everyone who is pointing out this issue is just trying to troll Feeble. Far from it. I found plenty of comments criticizing Feeble over this Death Knight fiasco who were not suggesting that they disagreed with any of his other opinions or trying to paint him as disingenuous. And if so many people are picking up on this, then it should be reasonable to understand that maybe it is you who is in the wrong and accept that without feeling the need to complain about it so much. That is the bigger man thing to do. Not to mention that this whole Death Knight clarification section he is using as an example of Fromsoft fans missing the forest for the trees with his critique, which is again downplaying criticisms of his video just because it wasn't the main point. To be clear, if you include it in the video, it is open to criticism. In the second half of his Death Knight clarification, he goes on to gaslight us on the definition of the word reskin as well, and how his personal broad definition is something that he has been using for a while now. He is again shifting the blame onto his audience for misinterpreting him and not saying, I'm sorry. I'll try to be stricter with my terminology from now on.
Now, if you've been paying attention to the channel for a while, you should have realized that I use the word reskin very loosely. The strict definition means a boss with an identical moveset and a new visual skin. I group copy-paste enemies and bosses with a few changes into the category of reskin, although it does not fit the strict term. I do this because it's a convenient two-syllable word, and I do it kind of a lot. I thought that people had caught on to that, but apparently they got really angry. By my broad definition of reskin, meaning reusing a substantial amount of an already existing boss's moveset and visuals, I think the Death Knight fits.
First of all, it is unfair to assume that viewers of his Shadow of the Erdtree video should be familiar with his entire channel. Second, instead of admitting that he was wrong, he is providing the excuse that he meant something that is different from the definition of the word, and the reason he does this is for the sake of convenience. I don't understand the convenient part, as I don't really know how much time he would have saved by just saying a reused Death Knight with a different weapon. Although this still sounds a bit silly to me without the caveat that there are only 2 in the game. So maybe he should have just left the Death Knights out entirely, given that it's just not a very good example to support his argument of poor quality mini-bosses. This would have been the most convenient thing to do from a time-saving standpoint, which he seems to be quite concerned with, especially if he in fact actually liked them. If Feeble truly does actually like the Death Knights, then for the love of God, why does he not offer any explanation as to why he used them as an example to support his argument that the mini-boss quality is terrible? If his audience assumed wrong, then what did you want them to assume?
You're either making your arguments in bad faith, or you are a bad critic. Pick one.
Despite Feeble talking about the criticism and comments he received about his Death Knight remarks for 3 videos now, there is still no explanation provided as to why he did this anywhere that I have found. even if it was just a simple writing mistake. Thirdly, just because Feeble was loose with the definition of reskin in the past does not mean that he cannot be criticized about it now. And again, he is blaming the viewers for not being aware of his past content. He goes on to qualify why he thinks the Death Knights have enough similarities to be called a reskin under his broad definition, and you're free to agree or disagree with that. But then he goes on to explain how people didn't seem to have a problem when he called the dragons reskinned enemies, and how he was shocked that people got mad over using the word reskin in this way after all these videos.
We can certainly say that a reskin dragon with 1 or 2 new attacks is still basically a reskin, and on the scale of reskin to not reskin, I thought the Death Knights leaned closer to being reskins than unique combat encounters. Maybe I should have said a partially reskin Death Knight with a new weapon. If I'm being honest, the negative comments about me calling the Death Knights reskins was really quite shocking, because I've been using the broad definition of reskin for a long time now, and nobody cared until I disliked Shadow of the Erdtree, and then those comments got thousands of likes. Either way, I am fine with this reskin and never said that I disliked the Death Knight.
I think that Feeble was close to an epiphany here when he said these sentences back to back, because I think I do know why people got so fired up about it this time, although this is just a guess. When you make the remark, just another reskinned Death Knight, in a list of mini-bosses you think are poor quality, what connotation does that give the audience? I'm not even talking about them assuming that Feeble hated them, we've already been over that. I'm talking about what they think when he labels them as a reskinned boss. If they are familiar with Feeble's past videos, including his Shadow of the Erdtree one, then they know that Feeble hates reskinned bosses and boss reuse. This further reinforces his idea that he hates the Death Knights. He is putting Death Knights in the same category of bosses that he places dragons and ulcerated tree spirits into, which we know he despises. While this may be inadvertent on Feeble's part, or a misunderstanding on the audience's part, it is one possible reason as to why many people were fired up about it, and it shows why as a critic, you need to be careful about your words. Now, the strangest part about all this to me is that Feeble uses the Death Knight example as his only example to support his accusation of Gred slandering him. I know he mentions that there are many other examples of Gred committing defamation, but I still don't understand why he wouldn't use the accusation of plagiarism as the one example to use in his video where he is actually threatening legal action. We'll get into what constitutes defamation at the end of the video, but suffice to say, calling someone toxic or a gaslighter is not strong grounds for a defamation case since they are subjective opinions. But plagiarism is one thing that would be much easier to disprove in a court of law. It's kind of strange that this wouldn't be the obvious go-to example, but Feeble does say he is not a lawyer, so maybe he is unaware of this. It's also a bit strange that Feeble would open his video response to Gred with the main thesis of debunking the allegations of being a plagiarist sycophant gaslighter, then immediately address the sycophant and gaslighting elements, but leave the plagiarism accusation till the last 5 minutes of his 45-minute video. Typically, viewer retention is rock bottom by that point, even in great videos, so naturally you would want to debunk that at the start of your video for your audience to see. But Feeble does lament Gred reading into him too much, so we'll just leave it at that. Now, all of this is not to say that this means Feeble knows what he did is plagiarism, or that he is admitting to it. But it doesn't help his case that he goes on to once again downplay him plagiarizing Joe's spiel about subjectivity being implied and not even deny it.
Some people might say, but you plagiarized Joe, so shouldn't you go to jail? And it's like, I don't think Joe will sue me over a one-sentence intentional reference to his video in a video with his name in the title. It didn't do much damage, but did calling me a manipulative gaslighter sycophant who can't admit fault to 300,000 people cause damage to me? Damage that could have been easily avoided if he ran the clip a few seconds longer where I say I think this is my fault? This is so manipulative and wrong.
He instead downplays the damage of plagiarism when compared to defamation, which is debatable but also not worth debating since they are both still wrong. Plagiarism is very damaging because you are taking someone else's ideas and making people think they are your own while profiting off their work. It is a massive issue on YouTube where it is basically a guarantee that every video essay will be completely ripped off and stolen. There's plenty of examples of bigger creators stealing ideas and the original creators being called the ripoff by the audience who is unaware, and it can negatively impact their revenue and reputation. I don't think I need to explain the ways that plagiarism is damaging, but it is kind of funny that Feeble says his plagiarism didn't cause much damage, and then in the next breath say that he is being falsely accused of gaslighting. You know, downplaying fault, minimizing the issue, and playing the victim. This is just yet another example of why I think that both of Feeble's response videos did way more to prove Gred's criticisms right than anything in his Shadow of the Erdtree videos. To be specific about Gred's criticisms, gaslighting his audience, not being able to handle criticism, and struggling to admit when he is wrong, which Gred calls toxic. I really believe that both of these response videos were very silly mistakes in light of what Gred was actually arguing, and I can't help but find it a bit funny is all. I don't even think Feeble is necessarily intentionally manipulating his audience. It may be just how he responds to this stuff because it's worked for him in the past. This is also not to say that Feeble is the worst YouTube critic, or that he is the most toxic part of the Fromsoft community. Gred is talking about the influences of Joseph Anderson, how people adopt his broken format, but also how his toxicity is rubbing off on his imitators and his fans, and he makes Feeble wear it. If I had to guess why Gred chose to talk about Feeble over the plethora of other armchair critics, it would be because of his follow-up video to his critique of Shadow of the Erdtree that was longer than the original video. It was a bad look, and it was an easy case to make for Gred. Remember, Feeble is just a symbol of a larger problem for Gred. I don't think he has any personal vendetta against Feeble, and neither should we. Now that we have put all this heavy stuff behind us, I can finally stop baiting you and we can move on to our funny little reaction to Feeble's defamation video on stream. I will once again remind us that this is all very unserious, and while I can't exactly say that it's lighthearted given the seriousness of an accusation of defamation and plagiarism, I just want to immortalize this moment in the community, not to propagate hate for Feeble or to send any more his way, but because threatening a joint defamation lawsuit with Joseph Anderson versus the Fromsoft community over a video about not being able to handle criticism is inherently funny. Feeble has caught more than enough hate in his comments, and if I have one plea, it's that we as the audience should also strive to be less toxic in the relationship to the critic, and try to give constructive criticism when it's warranted. Yes, Feeble is not perfect, but there's no need to mire criticisms about his video in smug gotchas or resort to name-calling. As we have seen, this is not helping the overall goal of improving the content, and this is something that I want to improve on as well. Lastly, I do not live in the United States, but here is your obligatory "I'm not a lawyer, this is not legal advice anyways." Now, let's move on. Despite how quickly the video was made and how much faster than that it was promptly taken down, I still think there was ample time and stop moments during the process where Feeble could have thought better. There's recording the voiceover, editing the voiceover and balancing the audio, filling out the timeline with footage and searching for clips to download, previewing the video, reviewing the video for render glitches, and reviewing it again on YouTube for upload glitches, and ultimately selecting publish video. I think he may have learned his lesson already that these sorts of decisions are better slept on, but I am again trying to justify why I am okay showing you this video. You may disagree with addressing someone's unpublished video, and that is valid, but I hope I have shown you enough to this point that you'll agree that much of the criticism being presented about Feeble's Shadow of the Erdtree critiques is warranted. But now, it's going to get a little bit silly. Hi there. Edit Lupine here. Wow, this video is pretty long, huh? My bad. So the reason that I have descended to talk to you here is that originally I had planned to show my livestream reaction to Feeble King's defamation video. Unfortunately, that brought the video's total length to 3 hours, which is way too long. So while I make some arguments about Feeble King's points in that video, I have decided to rip it out and to place it on the side channel. It's a channel where I host my stream content and non-scripted videos, so I think it fits the vibe there. I'll leave a link to that video in the description if you're not already completely sick of listening to me. I did promise that I would talk about defamation though, so I will include a couple clips from that here so that you can see what you're in for. The first third is Feeble King threatening legal action against Gred, then a middle section defending Joseph Anderson and suggesting a joint lawsuit with him, followed by a second half where he can't help himself and talks about the fanboys versus the critical minds, and argues against hypothetical opinions made by imaginary fanboys over future games. It's a bit of a wild ride to say the least. Thanks again for watching. Appreciate ya. The reason I'm going to show you this is because in his comments and stuff, he says the reason he took it down was to not expose him to legal trouble. Not that he like disagrees with what he presented. And he still has it up on his Patreon, and it could just be unlisted for all I know. So we're going to watch it.
Gred, you can't publicly lie and say that another person is guilty of gaslighting to avoid accepting fault. And to prove this point, use footage where you cut me off one line before I say, I think this was my fault.
How hard would it be just to be like, you know what? I wrote that so badly. Doesn't reflect my actual opinion about the Death Knights. My bad. Like, how hard is that? And yeah, maybe I shouldn't have said reskin. Maybe I should use stricter terminology. My bad. That's just such an easy, like, I hear you, my audience, noted. Why did you have to like hand wring so much about it, you know? Toxic is an opinion anyways. Yes, that is the other thing that we are going to touch on later. Calling someone a gaslighter, manipulative, toxic, those aren't provable grounds for defamation. Those are subjective opinions. The subjectivity is implied in those criticisms, indeed. Thank you, Gred, for this banger.
I know Fromsoft fans can get desperate to make me look bad, but please keep it legal.
Like, no one's desperate to make you look bad. Feeble's not speaking like truth to power. Oh, we have to silence this man. He's dropping too many truth bombs on the community. We have to slander him. No one's desperate to make Feeble look bad. No one wants to like just trash on him for no reason. It's Feeble who is out here making himself look so bad. One of the main points of contention is that you were unable to handle criticism, making a 40-minute response to that video, and then hours later threatening a defamation lawsuit is insane. Who is out here making people look bad worse than he is? Like, he's his own worst enemy.
It didn't do much damage, but did calling me a manipulative gaslighter sycophant who can't admit fault to 300,000 people cause damage to me?
Did it do damage to him? Well, let's see if we can find out. This is Feeble's Social Blade. Gred's video came out October the 6th. That would have been right around this time. If we look at his chart, oh look, he has only gained subscribers since then with no dip. And he has only gained views on his YouTube. So I don't really know how you could prove damages. Plagiarism doing damage has nothing to do with it. It's fucking plagiarism. Also a good point. You don't have to prove damages to prove plagiarism. Also, I did not fit every liar strawman argument into my response. It would take too long. I just talked about the worst parts. Oh, he means in his main response, he only addressed the worst parts. He didn't fit every strawman and lie that Gred talked about in his whole video. There's plenty more that I haven't even talked about.
Had any integrity at all, he'd take it down for the massive amount of misinformation and what might be a defamatory statement inside of it. Of course, this probably won't happen because the guy wants his 5 minutes of fame in the YouTube algorithm.
Ooh. It is kind of funny to say that Gred just wants his 5 minutes of fame, but like in his video, he is accusing you of being a ripoff of a ripoff. The guy actually doesn't want the culture of the discussion of art and critique to be better. He just wants his 5 minutes of fame, guys. That's all he wants.
And it feels bad because I don't have the reach to prove his claims wrong to everyone who saw the video. I also can't sue because I don't have any money.
I don't know about that. Feeble has like plenty of videos that crack like, or get up to like 500,000 views. He has like at least one video over 1 million views. And he has at least 3 times the amount of subscribers as Gred. Like, I don't understand that at all. Like, saying he doesn't have the reach.
I literally can't undo the damage he did to me through lying. If anything, I just hope you guys can spread my first response video around so that more people become aware that Gred lied to defame the critics he so despises.
This is so sad, fam. Please share this video with 10 of your friends to become a giga gamer. It's part of the gaslighting. He's playing the victim, right?
I am not immune to critique, but you are not immune to breaking the law. On to another topic. It's time to talk about my favorite parasocial YouTuber relationship with Joseph Anderson. I feel
Please, no. Please don't do it. Please don't.
a bit bad that I connected myself to Joseph Anderson, which might have influenced Gred's decision to drag his name through the mud with mine. I thought it was mostly undeserved, but that's not to say that Joe didn't do anything.
This kind of seems like a little bit egotistic. The video is not about Feeble. Like, the video is about Joseph Anderson. Joseph Anderson is in the thumbnail. Feeble is in the video because Gred uses Feeble as a prime example of the people that copycat Joseph Anderson, the people that rip him off. That's why Feeble is in the video, because he considers him a byproduct of Anderson's toxicity. But to be fair, Feeble is mentioned a lot in that video.
Why would you use so many clips from a video Joe doesn't like to prove his style of critique as being inauthentic? You doing that is inauthentic.
I think the thing that Feeble doesn't understand here is that Gred is saying that Joseph Anderson's format has not evolved or improved much at all since his DS1 videos. His videos are still the same because his process for making videos is still the same. He is showing that his Shadow of the Erdtree video is still the same thing as his DS1 videos since those times. He is still accusing you of complex psychological problems if you disagree with his suggestions of change in the games. And he is also showing that a lot of Joseph Anderson's problems with the game that he considers indefensible have nothing to do with skill. Things like the lore and the quest design. And yes, Gred mentions in his video, he's a little bit embarrassed by these videos, so I won't pick on him too much for these.
He's not being destructive, he's just giving opinions.
But like, how is it not destructive criticism then? Those things are not mutually exclusive. You can be giving your opinion and it can be destructive criticism. Please tell me, how is it not destructive criticism? Because in my mind, what Gred argues is pretty valid. The fact that he only holistically focuses on the negatives no matter how much he likes or dislikes a game, and does it to make like jokes and for the showmanship of his video, the engagement of it, that would qualify as destructive criticism to me. Like, so like, please tell me, like, how is it not destructive criticism? It's not just giving his opinions, he's giving his opinions in like a very mean way. And very often he is saying that if you disagree with some of his opinions, you have like a victim complex, or that you're just a loser who these games are just your surrogate parent.
Why would you use so many clips from a video Joe doesn't like to prove his style of critique as being inauthentic? You doing that is inauthentic.
He's not trying to show 10-year-old clips of Joseph Anderson to show that he's inauthentic. He is showing that he is inauthentic because his style of critique does not compute with his actual opinion about the game. That is why he says it is inauthentic and that his arguments are in bad faith, because he is only focusing on the negative, even though it's one of his personal favorite games. Shadow of the Erdtree, like we were saying before, his format has not evolved much, is also, I don't know if it's one of his favorite games, but he really liked Shadow of the Erdtree. But all he does is complain about mean comments on his first video and then barely talk about the positives. He again just like roasts parts of the game. He did that for DS1. And he did that for Shadow of the Erdtree.
And hey, there might be a chance that this or something else Gred said about Joe counts as defamation too, and we can get a Joseph Anderson and Feeble King lawsuit, which would be beyond ridiculous and something that could only ever happen in the Fromsoft community. A bunch of people watching right now are like the Joseph Anderson Feeble King crossover that we never knew we needed, where they team up with legal defense against the Fromsoft community. That would be so funny. Now, again,
oh my god, please, dude. Like, please stop negging Joseph Anderson. Like, please. Remember that whole thing when Gred called your behavior sycophantic? This is not helping that. This is not helping that case.
The fact that I probably could win a defamation lawsuit if I had more money says something about the quality of Gred's video.
Me and my friends talked about it, guys. We all agreed I would definitely win this lawsuit if I ever did it, which I won't. Gred's just lucky I don't have enough money to start a frivolous international lawsuit.
I think the Fromsoft community is getting so upset about criticism that they're starting to go insane. And
This is what makes FromSoft fans insane.
And to make an entire video essay where the whole point is you can't say your negative opinions about what I like because you're not a game developer. It's ridiculous. There's no other way to say it. I think Gred might be...
Ugh, that is far from the point, and he makes it so clear. It's crazy. I'm not even like doing a feeble thing where I'm like, that wasn't his main argument or that wasn't his main point. Like, that is just straight up not the point of that video at all.
Here's my personal rule on how to understand if an argument is from good faith or if it's from a fanboy. Everyone was happy, and then they changed it, and then some people are like, oh no, it's a 10 out of 10, ignore all the flaws. All the flaws are actually the reason why it's amazing. But imagine if they fixed it and they put like the 40-second rule that The Witcher 3 used in...
What? Who are these imaginary people that are arguing the flaws of the game are what make it amazing? Who's arguing that? Who is saying that? I think he's trying to say that like fanboys will just praise the game no matter how good or bad it is and it doesn't matter. What is this insane hypothetical argument? Who is like, I love the objective flaws with this game? That's what makes it so good.
And then everything's fine, ignore all the criticisms. Do you not even like art if you don't like the empty space? The way I see it, this is my...
They're not ignoring the criticisms. They just disagree about the criticisms.
Issue with the fanboy argument. It seems like if they fix the issue, everyone would like it because the fanboys were going to like it either way. But if the issue is in the game, the fanboys will still like it, defend it, say it's the greatest thing ever. But the people with critical brains will be a little bit upset with parts of the game. So...
What the fuck? I actually can't believe this right now. People can disagree with your suggestions of change to games they like, man. Like, how can you sit there and say that, like, if my changes of what I think FromSoft games should be like are implemented, or just some nebulous amount of my criticisms, I won't tell you which ones, are implemented, then they will definitely like that more. They will like it no matter what. That's fucking hella narcissistic. The critical-minded people will understand the flaws of the game. It's not that they are less satisfied with the direction of the game than other people who maybe like certain aspects that those people dislike. Those people are the critical brains, the real high IQ gamers. They are able to sift through all the bullshit of a magical artistic experience and get down to the bone-cutting flaws. They can see all the flaws in the game that need to be fixed to make it better.
Make Elden Ring 2, and a bunch of these people I see as fanboys come out of the woodworks to say, man, I really miss the empty space. I really dislike the quality over quantity design. I really dislike how dense the map is with good content. If they all come out of the woodworks and say that, then okay, I was wrong about that. But a part of me doesn't think that will happen.
Who is saying that, like, yes, I love it when the map is not dense? There are probably a lot of people, including myself, that more so just disagree that the density of the stuff to pick up on the ground and stuff to do on the map is not as big of a problem as he is making it out to be. It's not game ruining. It's not like 60% of the issue with the game, like he says. It wasn't that bad. It's not even that long to traverse. It's just a little bit of quietude in between the boss fights where you can just sit down and appreciate the beauty of the game as well. It's a nice juxtaposition to have. Would more content be good? Yeah, probably. But like, also we understand that the game is pretty damn big. You can't just ask for the perfect game with infinite stuff to do that's always rewarding, never gets stale. Like, yeah, there's a certain point of reality, right? The DLC has 100 new weapons. Yeah, like maybe people like that kind of stuff more than he does. Maybe it's not that they hate dense open worlds.
Shouldn't we lean towards the people with critical minds so that everyone is happy? But who knows? All of the things I just said are just my opinions, and in my opinion, Gred might have broken the law.
The funny thing about saying like the subjectivity is implied, in my opinion, Gred broke the law. The funny thing about the law is that it is not subjective. That is why when you accuse people of a crime, or when people are accused of a crime, you say allegedly. With defamation, we said we were going to talk about it. From my understanding of defamation, you have to prove for defamation that the person is intentionally lying. You can't really prove that a guy's calling you sycophantic or a gaslighter or toxic. He didn't say that he never admits faults. That's just not a true thing at all. all. It's really hard to win a defamation lawsuit on things like that because that is a subjective opinion on someone based on an assessment of their behavior. And the other thing is, for defamation, which is really tricky, is you have to prove losses. And I don't know how Feeble would do that. He has gained subscribers and gained views. So like, I don't know what metric he could concretely point to say this did tangible harm to my reputation or my revenue or whatever, right? And then the most important part of a defamation lawsuit is you have to prove that what they said was not true, which it isn't. You'd be surprised how many defamation lawsuits fail because the defendant simply proves that the statement was true. When Gred's one of his main points is that these critics can't handle criticism. That is like an aspect of their toxicity. They feel the need to make 40-minute response videos, arguing their opinions to the death, blowing up on their comment sections, trying to prove their opinions, going on and on about it because they can't handle criticism, to turn around and then make a video threatening defamation over that criticism is just such a bad look. If Feeble had just took a step back and like understood the criticisms that Gred was presenting, I think he would have realized that this was very bad optically. It wasn't an attempt to like intimidate Gred into like taking down the video. Like, I don't know. It's just very bad mistake. But to be fair to Feeble, should take this with a big grain of salt because he deleted this video after like 30 minutes. Again, he took it back, but like I said, it's still up on his Patreon and he did not disagree with his take in the video. Oh, here we go. Why did you private your other Gred Glintstone video? I'm not sure if I was overstepping my bounds by claiming what he did to be illegal. I'm not sure what is the best way to handle the damage his lies did to my channel. Feeble has not issued like a public retraction of this statement or anything of the sort. I'm pretty sure he just unlisted it. It's still on his Patreon for profit. That's why I feel okay talking about it. And yeah, if you were going to clap back on Christmas Day, hours after like a 40-minute video and threaten someone with a lawsuit, wouldn't you want to like argue why you think it's defamation in that video? But instead he just like argues one single tiny minor point, just says that like all of Gred's stuff was like lies. There was too many to even include in his big response video. And then just spend more than half the video complaining about Fromsoft fanboys and the way they argue with them. It's like he can't help himself. This is him talking about the illegal defamatory content, and then this part is him like defending Joseph Anderson and then just like complaining about people disagreeing with his takes on Shadow of the Erdtree. It's like he literally can't help himself. I hope that this video was able to shed some light on this niche situation, but more importantly, I hope that this can be a lesson for creators to avoid toxic behavior towards their audience and the art, as well as for viewers to be able to spot when a creator is being toxic. The reason I originally made this video was because I wanted to watch a funny video about a guy threatening defamation over criticisms about his review of a video game, but I felt that it would be unfair to do so without trying to seriously engage with what Feeble is saying in his defense. I'm sure some people in the Feeble camp would probably feel like I'm downplaying their feelings if I just called the whole situation silly and wrote it off as nothing more. But now that we have finally gotten to the juicy bit, I only feel a little bit sad and empty. As this script grew, I realized that I think Feeble may be getting a bit out of control with the gaslighting and the inability to cope with criticism in a positive way. Looking back on his Shadow of the Erdtree videos, I think Gred's criticisms are warranted, but now in comparison to these two response videos, it's not even close. In my opinion, these responses did much more harm to Feeble's image than anything he has said in his reviews. More harm than good is an understatement. Feeble is toxic. Lots of YouTubers are, but it doesn't make it okay. I myself have been quite toxic in the past, and I am actively trying not to be. We should strive to be better. I have come to realize that whether I agree or not with criticisms of my video, even if they are snarky, it is much healthier for the discourse and my channel to simply try to understand the core of their issue and see if I can do better next time. It is not helpful in the slightest to try and dunk on them in the comments, write off their issue entirely as just a dumb troll, or to make update videos to your opinions where your attempt to clarify only serves to downplay those feelings they have. Whether or not Feeble agrees with any of this, I just want him to understand that some people have problems with his content, and that is valid. It's not all some nebulous troll army of cultists who are preying on his downfall. There are fans that just want to see him hone his critical writing skills and stop engaging with the drama. His audience doesn't care if Feeble likes Joseph Anderson or that some random guy called him a gaslighter. They just want to enjoy his SL1 videos, and they could care less to see Feeble making a big deal about all of this hullabaloo and doubling down over and over again, forever clarifying what he actually meant when he said stuff. Feeble is absolutely free to keep making what he thinks a good critique should be, and he is entitled to his opinions, but he is going to need to learn a healthier way to handle criticism, because his current strategy is unsustainable.
Holy matrimony, oh, throw me a bone. Get the kids in car, but never take my home.
Come on now, Gred keeps the house. We hope that Gred keeps the house. We pray that Gred keeps the house.
Come on, Beth, your new life is about to start. Keep moving, stay true to your heart. It's out of sight and it's out of mind. Leave that old divorce behind.
It's like, bro, have whatever opinion you want. My only issue, and I think you've seen it here, if you're toxic to me or mean, I don't care too much. Maybe I shouldn't have harped on that so much. But a lot of these straw man arguments, like the several straw man arguments you make against me when you can't understand my videos, and then you're going to turn around and be like, but it's because you're not clear enough. Some people are intelligent enough to understand the videos, so I don't know. I don't know why it's so difficult for you.